Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. I am hopeful that somehow next door they will be able to hear me and recognize that the session has begun. Did you enjoy the morning session? Yes, I thought it was absolutely fascinating. I was so disappointed to have to cut our last speaker, but of course we want to be timely. So here in the Caribbean, we have some sayings. I'd like you to repeat it back to me or give me the ending of this if you know it. We say, God is good. We also say time is money. And we're losing money today. So I really want you to encourage your comrades to please return on time so that we can get things moving speedily. Our panelists and our moderators are ready to go. And so we want to give them the respect, yes, but more so ourselves the opportunity to learn how we can improve our business lines. So please, please, please encourage those not in the room to come back on time whenever those options arise. Again, I would like you to check the app for former sessions. Please respond to the polls on that app. We do have a prize to give away for the person who is most engaged with the VR app. So please download it and go and respond to our polls per session. Now that housekeeping has been taken care of, I am excited for what else we will cover during this mid part of the morning. We're going to be speaking now on a conversation on innovative, sustainable financing. Innovative, sustainable financing. For those businesses in the room, I'm sure that your ears are perked up and ready to go. To lead this conversation, there could only be one man. A man with experience in all aspects of banking and finance, Mr. Navin Dukaran, CEO of the Export-Import Bank of Trinidad and Tobago. Mr. Dukaran will introduce the panelists to you, but please welcome our moderator as he comes, and we have to make up for some of the empty seats in the room, so I want y'all to be as robust with your applause as possible. Welcome, Mr. Navin Dukaran.
Thank you very much, Anastasia. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to CIF, the Caribbean Investment Forum 2023 panel discussion on the topic, Innovative Sustainable Financing in the Post-COVID Caribbean. The objectives of this panel discussion will be to examine the role of financial institutions in supporting the economic growth in the Caribbean and explore some of the innovative sustainable financing options that exist in supporting access to finance. And I must say, with the European Investment Bank, African Exim Bank, CAF, Republic Bank, Proven Group, I think we have here probably half or so of the 140 to 160 billion probably covered right on this panel already. As I'm the moderator, in addition to those topics, I want to take the liberty to add a few other layers in discussion, and I'm sure from talking to some of my colleagues here, it is going to be a nice, fruitful, and engaging discussion. And one of the areas that I want to focus on, and I want our colleagues here to dive deeper into, is in the area of collaboration. We know collaboration is key to execution. And I know just on this panel alone, there are multiple parties that are already collaborating. And I want to ask you to take the opportunity when you do speak to go into some of those details when you've collaborated with positive outcomes with various stakeholders. Another area that is near and dear to myself and the Exim Bank in Trinidad and Tobago is how we reach that last mile. You know, there's big pools of capital, but how do we get it down to micro, small, and medium-sized businesses in a sustainable and profitable manner? And so that's an area that also I know many of the colleagues on the panel here are, very adept at as well. And also, South-South trade. You'll probably hear some of that discussion here and that potential and the possibilities with regard to South-South trade development. So those are some other areas that I'd like us to just touch on as we move forward. And I'm going to introduce our panel members, but as I said, with this panel, the organizations comprising probably half of that whole total investment capital number. The people on the panel are somewhat also so well esteemed that I can't go through their entire bios. I apologize, because if I do, I would be taking up the full hour that we have for this session. So let me just give some highlights. And first, I'll start with Mr. Nigel Baptiste, President and CEO of Republic Financial Holdings. He's a career banker for the past 32 years and has led the financial group through various growth and transformation initiatives. So I don't know if you know, but I've spoken to a few of your colleagues and your team members, and they spoke with admiration about you. And they say, this guy has a very sharp acumen, and he has an ability to ask very pertinent inquiries. He zones in, right? And I say, you remind me of my chairman of the Exim Bank, Mr. John Tang Yang, who is here in the room as well with us. And he does the exact same thing with our board meetings. And so I think it's the Republic Bank trading because he's a career Republic banker as well. So that's Mr. Nigel Baptiste. We have Dr. Stacy Richards Kennedy, and she is the Caribbean representative of Development Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean, CAF. Now, some of you will know that CAF just recently in July changed their branding to add Caribbean to their name. So good move, Stacy and team there at CAF. Dr. Richards Kennedy has over 25 years of experience in multilateral negotiations, development management, and international finance. And I picked one thing from her bio that I wanted to mention, which is notably, she formerly served as a pro-vice chancellor of global affairs for the University of the West Indies. So we will likely see some more triple helix models getting into effect as you continue in your tenure. Furthermore, from the European Investment Bank, we have Yves Ferreira. His 30 years of his career with the European Investment Bank and other institutions spans across various emerging markets, Africa, Southeast Asia, and the Caribbean. And I particularly liked that he has experience in microfinancing and private equity as well. And this bodes well for the conversation during this panel on alternative investments and that last mile discussion on how we get those funds to the end users. Another person who can ably contribute to this discussion is Narisha Farquharson, CEO of Private Capital for the Proven Group that has over $2 billion in assets. And she has over 15 years of experience in investment management. The last 5 years, she's fully immersed herself in the private capital ecosystem, where she has substantively functioned as an operating partner. And Narisha, I'm looking forward to hear about this operating partner and how you add more value than just funds. We have also Okechukwu Iherjerika, Acting Chief Operation Officer of the Caribbean Office of Afro-Exim Bank. Prior to his current role, he was the head of Trade Services Unit at the bank, a position he held for the past 7 years. Okay, as he said, I can call him, has more than 20 years of trade finance experience. And the African Exim Bank is taking a lead role in creating South-South trade. And Mr. Iherjerika is one of the team that is carrying the light to where there's need of light. And I want to hear more about that when we talk about the South-South trade. And lastly, joining us, I am looking forward to see on the screen if we have our virtual panelist has been able to join. And his name is Mr. John Ilitorio, Managing Director of Goldman Sachs Sustainability Banking Group. He primarily focuses on developing commercialization and capitalization solutions for clients in the energy transition markets across biofuels, renewable power, e-fuels, carbon capture, and nature-based solutions. His storied career has taken him through powerhouse brand names, not only like Goldman Sachs, but Barclays Capital, Deutsche Bank, and Shell. And I'm just going to pause to see, yes, we do have him online. Welcome there, John. So
Thank you.
That's it for the introductions for now. And I'm very excited with this group of folks that we have brought together here today to hear how this conversation unfolds. And so let's jump right into it. And I'm going to ask Narisha first. Narisha, let's start off with the context. What is meant by sustainable financing, and how do you see it playing a major role in the development of the Caribbean specifically? And Narisha, and for all of the panelists, when I do ask the questions, on your opening, you can take a few words once you partially at least answer the question, you can feel free to, continue with opening remarks as well. So Narisha, over to you.
Good morning. Thank you. Thank you so much for that introduction. I must say I consider myself a Caribbean citizen, and I'm very passionate about this area of sustainable finance. And I think it can be encapsulated in two words: vulnerability and resilience. And so when we talk about sustainable financing in the context of small island developing states such as the Caribbean, we're really talking about the ecosystem that enables us to raise and deploy capital into sustainable businesses and projects. So unlike traditional finance that uses risk-adjusted return, risk model-based assessment to determine how you allocate capital, what sustainable finance postulates is that, look, in addition to those things, we need to incorporate social, environmental, and governance dimensions. So what does that look like? That may be, is your board on the governance side, is there gender parity or balance on your board such that you can make more meaningful decisions, right? To what extent your business enables, the SDG goals, food security, reducing hunger, making funding available to the general public. So, that would be a holistic, I would say, definition, but I'm going to invite us to set the context, understand the opportunities, the issues. I'm going to invite us to come back with me to 1988, September 1988 to be exact, when Hurricane Gilbert, a Category 3 system, hit Jamaica. It left a trail of devastation. In the process, Jamaica lost 50% of GDP. I was in this first decade of my existence at that time, and I could vividly recall the roof of my kitchen caving in. There was no school for an entire term. Why was it so? Because the classroom was being used as a shelter for persons who lost their home in that disaster. The entire agricultural sector was wiped out. And so what that meant is that canned protein was the order of the day for about 3 months. And I'm sure many persons sitting in this room can relate to what I've just articulated. And so this is the reality that we face as a region in leaving a trail of indebtedness. I mean, at the peak of the pandemic, many of us know that the average GDP across the region was hovering around 100%, and 50% of that was as a result of rebuilding and reconstruction in the aftermath of natural disasters. And so, I moved from the 1988 scenario, Jamaica purposed in itself to strengthen its building codes, rebuild a more resilient economy. So much so that when Ivan hit in 2004, we only lost 8%. Now, a few decades down the line, we look at Dominica and even Bahamas here. Dominica lost everything that money could buy in around 4 hours. erasing 225% of GDP. In the case of Bahamas, you had a system, I think it was Dorian, that sat over this island for 48 hours. 48 hours, people. And so it's not that these two countries did not make the necessary investments as Jamaica did, but it's a case where we're seeing that climatic conditions have become more extreme. They're warmer, they're wetter, they're drier. And, you know, this is a result or outgrowth of a century of industrialization led by the global north. And the Caribbean, countries like in the Caribbean region and other SIDS are now at the front line of trying to preserve a planet. And so the elephant in the room is really, how are we gonna finance this transition? And it has been a big question mark. Well, for me, up until 2021, in the midst of the pandemic, when the Barbados initiative was put forward at COP21. As I said before, I'm very passionate about this area, and at that point, I saw a glimmer of hope. And I won't get into it because I know I have a lot of developmental specialists here. But essentially, what the plan postulates is a very ambitious, and might I say, pragmatic plan, but I do believe that it's credible. It's put forward a mechanism, a framework through which we can fund the over 100 billion that's needed by this region. And by the way, the world needs, I'm told by McKinsey, around 2 to 300 trillion to solve this crisis. But it put forward a framework in which funding can be made available. And already we're seeing positive impact of that, right? Just last week, Jamaica announced accessing funding coming out of the IMF World Bank Forum that will allow for investment in project preparation. No, that's a big deal. That will add to execution efficiency. And that's a major bucket, you know, that the plan postulates. Adding revenues, savings by investing in infrastructure. And so I'll close by saying that, do we have all the answers? No, we don't. But I do believe that conversations like these are important, and the political will and the maturity that's needed by the public sector, as well as the wisdom and courage of private asset owners, combined with that humanitarian ethos, can result in the redeployment of funds. Because we don't have a capital problem, people. What we do have is where funding is directed.
Very good.
It can be, once we are resolute, then we can see a sustainable future by redeploying funds into activities, businesses that are sustainable and future-proof. So I'll end there.
Okay, great, Narisha. Listen, one thing we do know in the Caribbean with all these hurricanes is vulnerability and resilience.
That's right.
And in fact, a lot of times when these natural disasters happen, it does mobilize capital. And the Caribbean is very good at actually rebuilding and resilience. I want to paraphrase your speech there with just an analogy. You know, people say that a lot of times capital flows through the path of least resistance, right? But there's sometimes that you want, like in sustainable financing, where you want the capital to be deployed for specific purposes. That means, I would say it's like a river flowing down from the hills down to the coast. But sometimes, where you want certain objectives, there may be an uphill part, or there may be a hill in between. And we have to try to build the aqueducts like the Romans. We have to build the tunnels. We have to build the different mechanisms that allows that water to be able, or the locks, to move up even to achieve these sustainable goals. So I think that's an analogy for what you were speaking about there. And one institution that has been really paving the way in this regard is the CAF, the Latin America Development Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean. I just wanted to say and the Caribbean again, right? And I will ask Dr. Stacy Kelly Richards, how can development partners or financial institutions push that drive towards sustainability? How can we create those aqueducts, tunnels, and these different things? So please, Dr. Richards.
Thank you, Navin. Excellent question, and thank you to the organizers for the invitation to CAF to be part of this esteemed panel. I want to start by framing it from the perspective that sustainable financing and sustainability in general really has to do with transitioning. So it's not only about financing, it's also about transitioning groups of persons, organizations, and societies to new practices and new ways of thinking and working. And we always need, therefore, to consider the push and the pull factors in that process. So it's really two parts or two key components of development management, which have to do with, firstly, systems thinking, and that's the holistic approach of focusing on the way constituent parts interconnect and interrelate, and how they work over time and within the context of larger systems. Financing plays a role in there, but there are also other parts to this systems approach. And then secondly, it has to do with behavioral economics. And that really looks at the combination of elements of economics and psychology, and how we can begin to understand human behavior and what influences not just the way persons think, but importantly, how they behave. And those who have read the book Nudge and have followed the work of economists like Richard Thaler, who won the 2017 Nobel Prize for Economics, and Cass Sunstein, you know exactly what we're talking about here. It's a very exciting area of research and practice, and I just want to put what we're discussing within that context, because financing is one component of a larger system of what we're trying to do as development finance institutions. Now, to respond more directly to the question about providing that nudge towards sustainability, for us at CAF, this has meant leading by example to ensure that our internal operations are underpinned by sustainability considerations and alignment to the Sustainable Development Goals, ensuring that what we do is good for people, it's also good for the environment, and also promotes prosperity and good governance. Our executive president always makes the statement and emphasizes that CAF is more than a bank. We are unique in that we are an indigenous cooperative bank that was set up by countries of Latin America and the Caribbean, for countries of Latin America and the Caribbean. So our board is constituted by representatives, ministers of finance from the region, making decisions about where the financing for development projects will go based on the development priorities of these countries in our region. So let me just say that we therefore pay attention to not just the objective of the financing, but also the nature of the financing mechanisms, as was touched on by this previous speaker, to ensure that the investment decisions take into account environmental, social, and governance considerations. It's also about tailoring the financial instruments, whether sovereign or non-sovereign, to support the needs of clients, both countries and companies, and to provide them with resources at the right time and with the required agility and flexibility. So that's something that I know many of the stakeholders and counterparts in the region recognize as distinct in our approach. And we see this as particularly necessary in the Caribbean, where the fiscal space is limited and the vulnerability to exogenous shocks and to climate change-related events, climate hazards, and so on, is quite high. So as we've heard, and as we know, and many of us have experienced, the extreme climatic events result in development setbacks that sometimes last years or decades. And therefore, as a multilateral development bank, we offer a suite of financial products that incorporate a sustainability lens so that we can finance initiatives to strengthen the resilience in all of its multiple dimensions: socioeconomic, technological, infrastructural, environmental, and so on. So it's really looking at it from a multifaceted perspective, and CAF, in many ways, is committing to working with our shareholder countries to achieve these goals. I'll pause there.
Excellent, excellent, Stacey. And yes, you know, I can vouch for that whole agility aspect of CAF. We've been collaborating with them on a number of different fronts. And in fact, on the sustainability side of things, your teams have been talking to us and many other institutions around the region, and those institutions that are open, and they have opened their doors to us with respect to your whole ESG policy and framework. And we are looking at using it as a base to how we then now use that as a framework to deliver our own environmental sustainability and governance protocols as well. So CAF has been very open. It's kind of like what you call open source, you know, once you start working with them, and the agility and tailoring. And that's why I'll have to say, I have to underline one statement you said, apart from all the other parts about system thinking and financing being one part, but leading by example. And I can definitely say, you know, CAF is one institution that has been walking the talk when it comes to that. So thank you. Now, moving on, I want to ask, and you know, we talked about collaboration and speed development, and we just saw Mr. Nigel Baptiste sign an MOU just before this panel with the Caribbean Export Development Agency. And I wanted to know if he could share a little bit about his group's collaboration with the Caribbean Export Development Agency, that a little bit more about MAU, how it's going to impact the small and medium-sized enterprises, and then, you know, anything else you want to speak about, but also on the South-South trade issue. Republic Bank already has a footprint in Ghana. So on those various areas, if you could shed some more light and let our audience know, Republics.
Thank you, Navin, and good morning to everyone, and thanks again to Caribbean Export Development Agency for inviting Republic Bank to participate, not just in the conference, but also the MOU. And I want to put the MOU into context. And the context is that long before sustainable financing became a thing of its own, with a definition of its own, and maybe even became a noun, right? The Republic Bank Group was interested in sustainable financing. And what we saw as being essential for sustainable financing were three ingredients. One, capacity building. Secondly, the currency of the financing. And thirdly, freer access to international markets. And with respect to the first, which is the capacity building, that is where the MOU is one example of what we saw as being essential for sustainable financing in the Caribbean. That particular MOU really deals with exports and export training for not just small and medium-sized enterprises, but really any size enterprise, as we are trying to work along with CEDA, who has significant expertise in this area, in trying to develop the export capacity of businesses in the Caribbean. And besides that particular export capacity trying to develop, the Republic Bank Group has also had numerous other partnerships, okay, right across all of the countries in which we operate to build the capacity of our small, medium, and larger enterprises when it comes to business planning, when it comes to financials, when it comes to being able to actually develop the particular line of activity that they might be involved in. So whether it is technical training or what have you, we have seen that providing the funds is not sufficient. It's almost a funds plus approach, which becomes essential for sustainable finance. And I think it is true whether it was financing for any of the ESG-related activities or any other type of financing that our businesses who want to grow require. So capacity building is what that MOU was adding to. Capacity building is what Republic Bank's partnership with CEDA for this entire conference is all about. So we saw that as an important ingredient. The second important ingredient was the currency of the financing. Because what we identified was that many of our Caribbean businesses, particularly those who might be involved in import substitution, and when we talk about our agricultural goals of 25, reduced by 25 by the year 25, import substitution is a part of that. And if you are to borrow in order to fulfill that ambition, you really can't borrow in a foreign currency because you really will be generating your revenue in the domestic currency. So that actually informed the group's expansion strategy that saw us develop a footprint across 14 or 15 countries, and you mentioned including Ghana. Okay. And one objective of doing that was so that we could actually support our Caribbean colleagues in the countries in which they operate, in the currency in which they operate. And so while the Republic Bank Group has somewhere in the region of $20 billion in assets, under its management, we don't look at it that way because the Trinidad dollar is of no interest to the person who's operating in Barbados. The Trinidad dollar can't be lent to somebody in St. Lucia. So it really needs to be broken down, and what we have been trying to do is build the capacity in each of the individual countries in which we operate, in each of the individual currencies in which we operate, so we could support those particular markets. And I mean, you asked about the South-South, what we have tried to accomplish, and which speaks to the third point, is really to see how we could develop the markets ourselves based on our footprint in the different jurisdictions. And so, besides the work that I know CEDA has done and CAF does and many other agencies does, Republic Bank also does its own part to try to encourage that South-South trade, whether it be via trade missions, whether it be via bringing businesses on a one-on-one basis together, who are clients of Republic Bank or not clients of Republic Bank. We have tried to develop that trade. But there has been there's another aspect of that third ingredient, which I think is probably more important, and that is our unequal access to many of these markets. We have a lot of these agencies that are providing financing to our local and Caribbean businesses, but we have non-financial trade barriers. Many of our countries come on and off blacklists and gray lists as though it's something that you wake up in the morning and you do. And that inhibits the ability of our entities to export because wire transfers are rejected. So these non-financial barriers, to my mind, are sometimes even more important than the funds which are being made available. And I know we have panelists here, and it'll be interesting to have a conversation, from the European Investment Bank, because we get the financing, we do what we have to do, but then we can't export to those markets because we're on a blacklist or we're on a gray list. And it spills over into so many other areas, whether it be carbon pricing, what have you. These non-financial barriers are as important to us, as the actual funds being made available. So I really want to kind of say to the extent that we can actually reduce those, it probably has an even greater impact than making some funds available. So I'll stop there for now.
Okay, thank you very much, Nigel. Yes, you heard it, funds plus approach, and I think I can already see a theme happening here with funds plus approach. And I do want to say that Caribbean export collaboration that you're doing, I did have the pleasure of actually attending Republic Bank's headquarters, and I actually was, let's call it, a lecturer for one of the export financing sessions for about 30 or so small business clients. I wasn't the first choice. I think I was the substitute teacher that day because the first choice could not make it, but I filled it, right? But I saw it in action, and I understand it's been happening in Guyana already as well. And I look forward to that expansion with that MOU signed here as well. And I think your points on that capacity building, yes. If capital is to be deployed, it has to be deployed in a risk-mitigated fashion. And therefore, where it's being deployed, there must be the capacity to deliver and execute. So I 100% agree with you on that. This next question is I think, the toughest question on the panel. And so I am going to ask both Yves and John to respond to the same question, and questions really. And really, it tells what are some of the new innovative financing trends and strategies that have emerged post-COVID, right? And what are some of the pros and cons of these alternative investment type of strategies from an investor perspective? Maybe let me start with Yves first, and then we will ask John from Goldman Sachs to chime in on these important issues.
Thank you very much for your question. Good morning, everyone. Just maybe coming back to some of the introduction that you made and the need to set a little bit the stage. I'd like to, first of all, talk about not sustainable finance, which is a big box, but the box that are inside of that box. So when you open the sustainable finance box, you get into a box called green finance, okay? Then you open that green finance box and you find a climate finance box in which you've got two other boxes. One of them is finance for mitigation and another one is finance for adaptation. So in my remarks, I will mostly focus on climate finance because as we saw, climate and climate vulnerability is really a big issue for this region. And we definitely have to be able to deal with the huge investment gap that we have in this particular area that amounts to not billions, trillions of dollars for the region between now and 2030. And another issue that I would like to tackle is the issue of collaboration, because you also raised this issue. So from a multilateral development bank's perspective, we all know that the different multilateral development banks, Asia Development Bank, Africa Development Bank, IDB, CAF, EIB, we've got all common shareholders. And those shareholders are telling us, collaborate more among yourselves, collaborate more with the private sector, and be more efficient and innovative. So for instance, to give you an example regarding collaboration among ourselves, we've been told to align our procedures in areas such as procurement or ESG. Why? Because either private sector entities or governments that have to deal most of the time with 1, 2, or 3 multilaterals at the same time in a project, they will have to fulfill the requirements of each multilateral individually, which is extremely cumbersome and very costly. So by aligning our procedures, the promoters just has to comply with one set of standards and therefore satisfy all the requirements of the different multilaterals. This seems something obvious, but it took time for this to happen. On the collaboration with the private sector is very important because if we talk only about climate finance, and if we talk about the figures between 2019 and 2022, indeed, the multilateral development banks have increased their financing from $40 billion per annum to $60 billion per annum. Climate finance. This is not enough when compared with the trillions of investment needs that we have on the other side. So this is very important in a sense that we have to collaborate more with the private sector in order to crowd in private sector money into this huge investment needs related to this transition to the green economy and to a more resilient economy towards climate change in particular. So this is where innovation comes in. We really have to use our funds in the most intelligent way. Definitely our role as multilateral development banks is to be a kind of trailblazer, to make a proof of concept, and most importantly, de-risk the involvement of the private sector, create mechanisms through blending, guarantees, to make sure that we can also attract private sector money alongside our resources in order to finance all those very important investment requirements. Another reality that was also touched here in this panel, and that is, of course, a reality across the world, but most particularly in the Caribbean, is the high level of indebtedness of the sovereigns. They were already indebted before the COVID crisis, and the COVID crisis only accentuated this situation. So they've got very little, let's say, fiscal space to be able to satisfy the needs of their population, both in terms of basic services, health, education, but also in order to prepare their economies to deal with catastrophic situations, as we saw with hurricanes. So one of the innovations that has been coming out in the market, and maybe my colleague will be able to come into more details, is the famous debt for nature or debt for climate swaps, that are a very interesting mechanism in order to allow the different sovereigns to allocate more resources to coastal protection, nature conservation. Another feature that is also very interesting is the fact that we all know that despite the important amounts that have been dedicated to climate finance, most of the monies go for climate mitigation. Renewable energy, solar plants, any other form of reduction in CO2 and other type of emissions. But not enough money has been dedicated to mitigation. And mitigation and adaptation needs very long tenors. You can finance a solar plant with a 12 or 15-year loan. You cannot finance the adaptation of a road network or a sewage network with 15-year money. So you really need long tenors. And we as development banks, with our ability to raise funds on the market for 30 and plus years, we also have to provide the sovereigns and also to a certain extent the private borrowers with very long tenors, up to maybe 30 years, with eventually also very important grace periods. And another feature that has emerged from the Bridgetown initiatives is what we call the disaster risk clauses. So this type of feature allows, for instance, a sovereign country that has gone through a natural disaster to suspend the payment of its loans and therefore not to enter in default vis-à-vis creditors, so as to give it time to allocate the scarce resources that it has to emergency rebuilding, and then when the situation is stabilized, it will be able again to feature, to service its loan. Another type of initiative, and I want to refer to Ambassador Van Dien's speech yesterday, where she made reference to the Global Gateway Initiative, a EU-sponsored initiative, and its different components, and one of them is what we call the Global Gateway, the Global Green Bond Initiative, GGBI, which is a large fund that is being set up. We, as EIB, we're taking the lead, but we're also associating to that initiative other EU DFIs, such as the French AFD, the German KfW, the Spaniards, and the Italians, in order to create a large fund that will invest in green bond issues, in particular bond issues from, let's say, vulnerable countries, and in particular, of course, here in the Caribbean, in Africa, that thanks to this fund that will invest as an anchor investor, will be able to come to the market with green bond issues and therefore raise funds for this transition towards a more greener economy. And I will stop here because then we'll enter maybe in the last mile discussion later on. Thank you very much again.
We'll come back to hear more, Yves. And And John, we're coming to you, but before, you started, Eves, about talking about these boxes, and you made me think of a personal story, right? So they say some men and women, some women, they compartmentalize things in their head in different boxes. You have a box for your car stuff, you have a box for some work stuff, you have a box for, family, and so on. And then one day I was sitting down and somebody asked me, well, Navin, what are you thinking about? I said, well, nothing. They said, well, don't you have all your boxes and so on? I said, yeah, well, I'm in the box with nothing in it. So yes, you have these different boxes, and you're right. We have to look at these different ways. You listed about 5 or 6 different, very tangible ways of de-risking and new solutions that would be able to provide solutions to the market. Let me ask John, who I know has been in this business for a long time, what Goldman Sachs and his group is doing and how they see the market unfolding across the world, and how is it relevant to the Caribbean as well. So, John?
Sure. Just want to make sure everyone can hear me okay. Yeah.
Yes, we're hearing you, yes.
Excellent.
Thank you.
So thank you for the question, and thank you for participating, at least virtually. I happen to be in the Middle East at FII as well, and it's quite interesting. I mean, I agree with Yves and his comments on, and I'll use your boxing analogy. If you take a backstop currently, and again, I lead a project structured finance team that is globally focused, with a high degree of focus in the Americas, Latin America, and the Caribbean, pulling together asset-based structured financing, project financing across sustainability and energy transition. What does that mean day to day? It's really looking at the commercialization of projects such that they are bankable, and which markets can we take those bankable deals to get sourcing of financing. The backdrop challenge since COVID, in one of your earlier questions, Navin, is the debt capital markets, the project finance markets for Latin America and the Caribbean have been very, very challenged, very few issuances generally, and capital markets have struggled. So it adds an already challenging situation in regular way structured finance into the Caribbean. So we need to be very thoughtful in this. One of the alternatives that we're finding success in, to Yves' point, is this collaboration effort. And this goes back to Narisha's comments as well of resiliency of projects. The underlying credit needs to be sound. I'll touch on that in a moment. So assuming the project fundamentals make sense, the collaboration across the multilaterals, DFIs, ECAs, and the private sector banks is absolutely critical, in my opinion, as we're looking at such a large quantum of capital for large infrastructure investment. And the innovation nearly needs to come to structuring. I think we've worked very well with many multilaterals, many DFIs, DFC, US Exim, the European counterparts, the IDB in the region. And there's a good comfort because some of the risk here and the ability of the general institutional markets and bank markets to put financing structures in place that are not overly onerous with regards to amortization and debt payment for large-scale capital investment is required. So I think the collaboration that we've seen of tranching debt alternatives for quality projects allows for a financing structure that is more compatible, that has a certain degree of flexibility to cover amortization of debt, coupled with credit support from the multilaterals and the DFIs, such that we can attract alternative capital into the region for these projects. So it is about energy transition, but it is about a constraint generally in the market to deploy capital into the region. So we need to enhance that with this collaboration and with not necessarily highly sophisticated financing structures, but financing structures that take into account the reality of the amortization and the tenor and the debt burden that these projects bring onto the various nation states, and how do we alleviate that through different forms of blended finance, other types of ECA, multilateral, DFI finance coupled with private sector. Those are the trends that we're seeing success in. We've done this in the Bahamas. We've done this in further in Latin America and Brazil, most recently, things like Real Lose on programs. And the uniqueness of those programs ties into something that I think Narisha was suggesting is this concept of local content, local training, and those degrees that enhance the resiliency of the projects, the fundamentals in the local communities, I think is needed if you're looking at resiliency over the long term. But maybe I'll pause there because there's a long list of how do you get some of these underlying projects done. And there's a project resiliency in addition to the financing that is needed. And that's really bringing best-in-class technologies to the table, distributed power, distributed generation, distributed broadband, which imports telehealth and teleeducation, things that could and afforded kind of northern markets during COVID, for example. Children were able to access via media, via broadband. That doesn't work if you don't have power and you don't have distributed broadband. So those types of resilient solutions are needed in the Caribbean, in my opinion. The same solutions where multilaterals, DFIs, EXIMs, and the private sector need to come together to package sophisticated financing around transactions, but also transactions that have underlying technology deployment that enhances resiliency in the communities of the Caribbean. It can't just be the mega projects. Maybe I'll pause there. And I'm not sure if I answered your question indirectly or directly, but I'd love to dig in more.
Excellent, John. Well spoken like a person who's been there, done that, right? You've mentioned the collaboration across multilateral banks, export credit agencies, and so on as being critical factors. And, you know, you've really highlighted, again, the same thing that Stacey was talking about regarding tailored approaches and structuring deals to meet the specific situation. The focus on large infrastructure and so on is also very, very key as we rebuild and remain our resilience as a region. Moving on, I have to ask Okechukwu of the African Exim Bank, who is here, and they have just recently set up office in Barbados. And I wanted to find out, you know, South-South trade is definitely something that could be of great benefit for a significant amount of the global population, not just the Caribbean, not just Africa. This is South-South trade across the globe. And, you know, the African Exim Bank is leading the way in this regard. And I wanted to ask, okay, as you told me, I can say, a little bit about the plans and how you see that unfolding here between the African Exim Bank and the Caribbean. What's the next steps? I mean, after all, you have a great prime ministerial sponsor in Prime Minister Bia Motley being the first one to sign into your agreement, right, for Barbados. So please let us know, you know, what's on the agenda there.
Okay, thank you very much, and good afternoon, I will say right now, to everyone. First of all, thanks very much to the organizers for bringing us to the table to perhaps add a different perspective to the conversation that's going on. And I think that's actually one of the values that we'll bring in, you know, to say, yes, indeed, the concept of South-South trade, you know, just aligning it with the theme of this conference, which is more around more action and less talk, to say how can we also make sure that this South-South trade that has received all kinds of comments in the past does not just end as a concept and become maybe like a reality. And actually, at our Phrasing Bank, we've actually seen that play a lot already. You know, for instance, during COVID, we were able to collaborate with the CARICOM to be able to acquire vaccines, which brought in, which was actually distributed to member countries to ensure that that dependence on foreign countries to donate vaccine to us is something that we need to deal with. And we also feel that on the platform of investment, on that venue of being able to find common opportunities between the two regions is something that once it is explored and, you know, addressed significantly, we'll be able to see a lot more value play, you know, in that space. I do know that just to boost this conversation, we are also going to have the Afro-Caribbean Trade and Investment Forum which is going to happen in Guyana, 30th to 31st of October. And the idea is we need to continue this conversation. What is not discussed about can never lead to any kind of solution. So that's why, for us, we think we need to play that pioneering role. We need to make sure that we provide a relevant guidance that is required. We help with the capacity building, which my colleagues that spoke have identified is one of the gaps existing in the conversation of financing. To make sure that that happens, we need to make sure that we open up, not just the conversation routes, but in terms of practical, transport routes between the two regions to fast-track trade. And this is going to also help in the resilience that we've talked about, that once the corridor, Africa-Caribbean corridor is significantly opened and working, then we'll be able to foster relationship that is sustainable, that in the event that some of those global shocks that used to happen in the past and affect member countries do happen sometime, we'll be able to find ourselves as partners that are dependable, that are going to be there through thick and thin to be able to sustain each other, to be able to carry each other along and make sure that we are able to navigate through some of these cyclical events that happen. Now, coming back to the main subject of the discussion, which is about sustainability. So for us, we think we align with what everybody is saying, which is around the fact that there is urgent need for action to save our planet. But we're also thinking that, yes, while it's important to save the planet, to also make sure that we do things, avoid all the global warming issues and the rest, we also need to make sure we align it with the other Millennium Development Goals of the UN to ensure that whilst pursuing one aspect of it, we don't end up creating another loophole. So right now, is something that, in quote, is cool to do for institutions to say, yeah, we're ESG compliant. And it's actually commendable. For us, we've done a lot of work internally. We have our own guiding ESG framework that supports us, which for some of the African banks that also work with us, we're able to provide that as guidance or steps which they need to follow and guide them towards setting up their own. And we've also created like a climate investment framework or strategy that enables us to consider the projects that we invest in to make sure that we align them with what is required, what is the expectations, and to make sure that also while financing, we subject some of those things to the relevant questions to make sure that we align. But we're not just stopping at that. We are a multilateral quite all right, but not in the likes of the others like my colleagues who have spoken, because we deal directly with the corporate. So in dealing with them, we notice the pain points that they go in trying to align or in trying to comply with some of the numerous requirements that are coming up as a result of this new area. What we do is now to say, how can we help you? So we provide some kind of advisory services to them, for those who are doing project financing. We also provide project preparatory facilities to help them pay all the cost of consultants that are required to help them shape up their financing to meet up with their requirements. And these are things that we think are also going to help them at the end of the day to be able to play the role that they need to play, which is being the engine room of the respective economies where they play in, being the providers of employment, because of course, if they stop because they are unable to comply, of course, those who work for them will be laid out, and that will create a bigger problem. At the end of the day, we also think on a global scale, there's need for harmonization of regulations. We do know, the last speaker talked about information as gold. So we do know that that's a gap that needs to be blocked. So we need to be able to trap all the information that are relevant to help the regulators come up with an implementable framework. We need to make sure that the regions that we operate in, have their own nuances towards this area of, sustainability. And how do we make sure that we incorporate those nuances into the global space to make sure that while rules are made, they are also made in such a way that it doesn't overtly stifle some of these other regions that are coming up. The transition is a very costly venture. Of course, they put it at about $50 trillion or so by 2050. We think it's a very complex structure. So we feel it requires a lot of collaboration, like my colleagues have said, a lot of investment, a lot of financing to make sure that all the steps that are required to guide towards that ultimate destination is actually financed collaboratively. So for us, coming into the Caribbean, we are looking at a portfolio size of about $3 billion for a start. And based on the framework that we have designed, we are looking to say we commit 10% of that portfolio dedicated specifically to sustainable projects, to make sure that at least we are also in keeping with these global guidelines. So I will stop here for now, and then maybe we'll be able to take on questions later. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, well, listen, you guys have done it already in Africa, and you have interest here in the Caribbean, and, we look forward. The message that we heard across the panel is collaboration, and that's what's going to work. Now, the time is precious, as we know. We're not going to have time to go back through everyone again, so I have to ask the panelists to, please excuse me just to pick two panelists to make some final words. And first, I just want to ask Yves, if you from the European Investment Bank could tell us a little bit about your microfinance experience, and then right after you, as we close it up, we end with Dr. Stacey Richards-Kennedy of CAF with some final words for us to close off the panel, please. So Yves first.
So very quickly, in this decarbonization move that we all have to go through, we're not talking only about big cement plants or big steel plants. We're also talking about households and small businesses. So we really believe that through microfinance institutions or through credit unions, there's a big challenge in terms of channeling climate fund or climate funding or green funding to this type of beneficiaries. So far, based on our experience, in particular in the Dominican Republic, there are three ingredients as a recipe for success. First of all, technical assistance, both at the level of the financial intermediaries, but also at the level of the small businesses, so that they really understand what is at stake regarding decarbonization, regarding climate change, what are the risks that will affect their businesses if they don't move into this direction. Then a lot of work to be done in product development. You don't finance a solar pump in the rural areas the same way you finance a shop in a city. And the really third element is concessionality. In a way or another, certain projects have a very high social impact and not necessarily a very high economical return. So through a certain number of concessional terms, in terms of maturity, in terms of interest rates, or in terms of investment grants, we are able to come up with products that are more affordable and therefore will make those small businesses viable going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Navin. Really, to close us off, I wanted to underscore the power of partnerships, because coming together, pooling our resources, pooling our expertise, we can not only go quickly, we can also go very far together. CAF is committed to boosting the financing available to the region. We already have committed an additional $25 billion by 2026 in terms of green financing, and then $1.25 billion for the oceans and marine preservation. So, but this is just a fraction of what is needed. We all know that. So we do need to come together, and we look forward to working closely with other development partners and multilateral development banks, and also the national development banks, to ensure that we can reach some of the SMEs and other institutions at the grassroots level, so that we have that comprehensive approach and that systems thinking that I mentioned earlier to achieve the goals that we have set for our region. Thank you.
Excellent wrap-up, excellent wrap-up. Thank you to all our panelists for your contributions, and thank you to the Caribbean Export Development Agency for organizing this panel. Thank you.
Thank you. And to our panelists, if you'd be so kind as to stand, we'd like to get a photo of you. So I will step to the side to make sure that that can happen effectively. If you can follow the instructions of the photographer. And as that is happening, again, let's give this panel another round of applause. I see some hands in the air. This is why, it's so important that we come back from our breaks quickly and on time so that we have the opportunity for that sort of exchange. Unfortunately, moderators have a bad rap, man, because we have to keep things moving, and that means that sometimes I'm not able to give in to what we would like to see happen. I would like to encourage you to take a snapshot of those persons who presented, perhaps find them on the app. Again, download the app, make an arrangement to meet them outside of this room so that you can ask those questions. And of course, if you can return to the app now and just take that poll, let us know what worked for the panel. If it is that you were frustrated, the moderator didn't let you ask questions, you could put it in there so we can know how to improve it for next time. But again, thank you so much to our panel and to Mr. Dukaran for making sure that that panel happened well. Continuing on now, we have another interesting conversation to be had, and this time it will come in the form of remarks from the Right Honorable Dr. Denzel Douglas. He is the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Economic Development, International Trade, Investment, Industry, and Commerce for St. Kitts and Nevis. And he joins us now to share his thoughts. Please welcome him as he comes.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator, for this opportunity to lend my own voice to the ongoing debate with regard to how we can better prepare ourselves and the Caribbean region for generating trade and investment opportunities in creating a bold new Caribbean. And so I want to thank the Caribbean Export Development Agency for this invitation and to be part of the Caribbean Investment Program or Forum for 2023. As we continue to chart a Caribbean togetherness course, formidable enough to rise to the local, regional, international challenges that we face, I believe that conversations of this nature will be very crucial. And so a bold new Caribbean is indeed a worthwhile ambition that should be pursued, and we want to really commend the Caribbean Export Development Agency for the second year this time around to bring us to this particular point. Just yesterday, someone asked me the question, that is, what were the policies and initiatives that had been successful in attracting foreign direct investment to St. Kitts and Nevis? And how can such strategies be adopted across the Caribbean region? And so, permit me for a moment to just simply highlight my own experience as Prime Minister and Minister of Finance for almost the entire period of 1995 to 2015, nearly 2 years that I served as the Prime Minister of St. Kitts and Nevis. Once the government started in 1995, in just a few years, we were challenged with a number of disasters and a major flash flood. We had, in fact, inherited at that time an unprofitable sugar industry. We were growing sugarcane, and exporting sugar to Europe, to Britain for over 400 years. And so we were therefore presented at that time with an almost blank slate on which to chart our young country's development path. We relied on our own experiences, and we began the transformation of our economy. Early in the second five-year term, we realized that the sugar industry was not sustainable. And so we took that very bold decision to close the sugar industry and chart a new course for our economic development for our people. In fact, one of the first things that we did, and which I think is critical, we relied on our investment partners, our development partners, and they created for us, together with our own human resource at home, what is now known as the National Adaptation Strategy, which basically outlined the development of the country, investment, and so forth for the period 2006 to 2013, having closed the industry in 2005. And this was really a guide to developing modern syndicates at Nevis, because we were really transitioning the economy, one that pursued the development of the country for over 400 years. And it became necessary to identify with the plans for the future through an adaptation strategy. I think this is where we are in the Caribbean region generally, where we've undergone so many changes, so many threats, so many pressures, that there must be some national strategic plan, not only on the part of the individual countries, but on the entire Caribbean region. And so we fashioned an economy based on services, led by hospitality and tourism, international financial services, offshore education services. And we attempted to diversify our agricultural sector to the point where we began to grow most of our own food in basic items and begun to export to our neighboring countries. I want to say that the adaptation strategy informed us of two realities due to our small size. It is worthy to note that we are the smallest independent nation in the Western Hemisphere, with a population of just over 50,000 people. We recognize that we had both a serious advantage in reverse economies of scale and a serious risk at the same time. The risk of exposure as one major investment going wrong had the potential to tank our small economy, which was already prone to the slightest external shocks. We are really today in the Caribbean region at the point where slight external shocks, as we are recognizing on a daily basis, can deter the seriousness of the investment opportunities in the developing our countries in moving forward. What this meant really is that we had to forego climbing the ladder on the doing business report. We were all the way down the ladder when they came, World Bank, and assessed us. We were all the way down to the bottom. But what that meant, of course, is that if we were going to scale up and ensure that we had opportunities to advance our country through foreign direct investment, there was something that we had to do about that. And so we created the St. Kitts Investment Promotion Agency, which created, in fact, a one-stop shop facility. And today, that has gone even beyond where it was then. And they're now concentrating, that same agency is now concentrating as well on exporting our goods or services to others abroad. In fact, one of the most controversial strategies that we recognized at that time, and which to some extent is confronting us today, is really the high level of concessions, tax concessions, that were provided to major developers who required large capital investments to make their projects a reality. Government was asked to get involved in securing capital that was being borrowed in order to invest in the country at that time. But in a small independent nation where we do not have minerals in our soil and we do not have the opportunities for oil in the offshore areas, it was absolutely necessary for us to do what was necessary in order to attract the necessary capital. Today, this is one of the important phenomena that we are facing as Caribbean leaders. At the same time, we have been told that tax concessions must be frowned upon. But at the same time, if we do not provide tax concessions, then how would we really achieve our success? We have to be very careful, therefore, that we may not necessarily have no tax jurisdictions, but maybe low tax, as we have seen some countries recently adopt in some of our various jurisdictions. In the end, I want to close on this particular point, not close the statement, but on where we were in transitioning St. Kitts and Nevis' economy. In the end, the adaptation strategy brought in quite a bit of investment. It gave us the opportunity of attracting upscale hotels. Only brand name hotels we attracted. The Four Seasons in Nevis, the Marriott in St. Kitts, in fact, the largest Marriott in the Caribbean region, over 900 rooms, Park Hyatt, and many more branded hotels concentrating on billions of dollars being invested in our country in order to ensure that we would survive as a people. And while we welcome those well-sought-out business investments, we made geostrategic decisions as well and curated relationships with our international partners, especially a country like Taiwan, Cuba, and Venezuela, which provided us a range of investments, especially in our people, in the education, building the human capital that was going to be absolutely necessary in moving forward. Today, we need to continue to invest in our people. We need to ensure that as the realities of this brave new world and Caribbean is emerging, our young people are specifically trained in the areas that today we have identified to be critical in moving the Caribbean development forward. The skills that are going to be necessary, not in the traditional areas, but especially in the areas which are climate-related, which are energy diversified, as we're seeing it today, and ensuring that we can really bring the Caribbean region into a perspective of modernity so that we can give our people our best opportunities. We need to become much more survival-based in our thinking. Because as the developed nations across the globe become more inward-looking. Survival and development in the post-COVID-19 sustainable development era requires us to work together as a region. We must utilize our regional institutions, especially our University of the West Indies, in order to chart that course that will enable us to overcome our own vulnerabilities. We must work together to explore new frontiers of development partners, reach across the entire world. A moment ago, we've heard about reaching across to Africa and what has happened so far with regard to the Afrexim Bank, which is now part of our Caribbean region. I want to highlight just two matters before I close. I want to specifically identify the need for us to concentrate on climate finance and climate-related investment. We have to make sure that we can use our regional development banks. We want to make sure that we can access not only the Inter-American Development Bank, but also that important institution in Latin America specifically. We must make sure that we have just energy transition that is taking place in our countries. The energy opportunities we are seeing must be just. No longer must we say that there is the potential for developing geothermal, for example, or solar, or water, but we must be able to ensure that those who are engaged with us bring us a just deal and a just arrangement. We must consider climate manufacturing. The region must become a hub for climate-related manufacturing. There is need for long-term investments and for partnerships that allow for climate manufacturing and a revamping of our manufacturing sector around climate resilience, as well as linking our energy independence on bolstering the tourism sector and providing energy for cruise carriers in particular. In St. Kitts and Nevis, for example, there's tremendous potential in geothermal energy in Nevis. More than 1 gigawatt, more than 1 gigawatt of energy there. The idea is to harness it, and we are doing so with the support of the Caribbean Development Bank and other private sector entities, which are convinced that if St. Kitts and Nevis would become a net exporter of energy, renewable energy, clean energy, then it can change the entire landscape of our country and other countries. In fact, the United States of America has indicated its interest. It needs energy in large abundance, for example, to support its manufacturing capacity in Puerto Rico. And so they have come on board and want to work with us to achieve this. Finally, St. Kitts and Nevis have a number of areas of interest. We still are interested in hotel sector development. We are still in a position to utilize our significant citizenship by investment program to supplement capital that is required for investors who are interested in our country. I am confident that if we were to pursue a number of ideas and develop the partnerships that we've mentioned here yesterday and over the next few days, there's no question in my own mind that we will be building a new Caribbean where we would do less talk and more action and more business. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Douglas. Certainly bringing up some great points there. Very exciting considering that you might be able to export energy, and those are the sorts of bold ideas that we talk about now as we recognize the region is in transition. I will continue the transition on to our next panel. At this time, we're happy to welcome Dr. Jackie Bend. She's the Managing Director of CIBC, First Caribbean, that is, Bahamas, and she is simply phenomenal, a transformational coach, a transformational leader. She really is an example of what one of our earlier speakers spoke about, which is in investing in oneself so that you have the potential and capacity to create and do dynamic things. So she, of course, is the perfect person for this panel, and she will introduce those panel members as we look forward to our session on greening the Caribbean. Welcome, Dr. Jackie Bend.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. I would like to invite my panelists onto the stage. Come have a seat with me, and let's get to work. In 2015, at COP21, world leaders signed the Paris Agreement, where 196 countries agreed to contribute to the goal of limiting global warming and effectively addressing climate change. Given our own climate vulnerabilities and economic challenges as small island developing states, those who have embraced the shift to renewables recognize the economic opportunities to develop a strong case for investments. Good afternoon, everyone, again. I am Dr. Jacqueline Bend, and I'm the Managing Director for the Bahamas and Turks and Caicos of CIBC First Caribbean. Joining me to explore the topic of renewable energy with a focus on investing and supporting the Caribbean's transition to green economies is Mr. Dwight DaCosta, Senior Business Developer, HDF Energy, Mr. Mervyn Furrow, Regional Representative, USAID for the Eastern and Southern Caribbean, welcome, Mr. Philip Julian, Founder and Chairman of Kenneth J. Green, and Mr. Felipe de la Mota, Team Leader of the EU-Caribbean Regional Programs. Collectively, you're looking at almost 150 years of experience right in front of you. They don't look it, but that's what you're seeing today. I want to let you know at the end of this, our conversation, we will open the floor for some questions because we want to have an engaging conversation on this topic that is so dear and to warm to our heart, greening the Caribbean, one investment at a time. And we would have heard yesterday from the Prime Minister, Philip Brave Davis, that the Caribbean is blessed with natural resources and bountiful opportunities. Today we're going to explore those opportunities, see how we can support the Caribbean in going towards a more sustainable investment and environment through investing. So I'm going to open the floor to my audience and to my panelists to let's get into a deep conversation. In front of you, we have some passionate men in their respective fields. So we're going to try to contain some of that passion that we would honor the time we have allotted today. But I want to start with the first question to you, Philippe. You're up first. Would you share an overview of your interest in the Caribbean? What are the opportunities that you see to leverage these natural resources to create a strong economic case to attract foreign direct investments?
Can everyone hear me? We're good? Just confirming you guys can hear me, right? Okay, good. So thank you again. I want to thank Dioda in particular for the opportunity, for the invitation to speak today. You know, I've been asking myself why I was invited because we met in the July summit at the EU-LAC roundtable in Brussels in July, and immediately after our respective presentations, he came to me and he said, "I'd like you to be part of this," and I would say, "Great." But up until yesterday, I couldn't quite figure out the answer to that why. And then I realized in what I'll be sharing in the next few minutes, there are, I guess, what may show up as a couple of aha moments or paradigm shifts in how you look at renewable energy in the Caribbean that I hope will resonate with the investors and with the general audience as to a different way to look at the Caribbean, a revolutionary way to look at the green energy in the Caribbean. So I'll start with we've all heard the figures, right? Like $226 billion of potential investments in the Caribbean. On our side at Kenneth J. Green, we see $35 billion possibility in the green hydrogen space, which I'll get to. We at Kenneth J. Green, our role is to convert that potential into reality, right? So we're project development firms, a project development firm dedicated to creating a pipeline of green decarbonizing projects that are investable and bankable for that money to be contributing towards a greener future, a greener sustainable future for all. So taking the theme of less talk, more business, I'll do a speed round of 5 projects, 5 investments in 5 minutes. Does that work? All right, so here we go. First project, in Trinidad and Tobago, Kenneth J. Green in 2020 started developing the NewGen project, which is a low-carbon green hydrogen project that will be creating about 20,000 metric tons per year of low-carbon and green hydrogen as a feedstock for one of the many ammonia and methanol plants that currently exist in Point Lisas in Trinidad, which is, I think, now trendily known as a hydrogen hub. That project has been progressing well, and we were successful in inviting Dwight's company, HDF Energy from France, in April 2022 to acquire 70% of the NewGen project. That commercial agreement will be ideally concluded in the next few months with production starting in 2028. So that's one. Moving beyond Trinidad and the rest of the Caribbean, where it starts getting particularly interesting is in the island of Dominica. You've just heard the potential of geothermal as export energy, green energy. The consideration of having geothermal as the possibility of enabling an entirely new green hydrogen economy for a geothermal-rich island such as Dominica was not lost in the Dominican government, who approached us to create a country assessment survey for them. That also went well, and it led to, in April 2023, of the government of Dominica signing a framework agreement with Kenneth J. Green of Dominica to create a joint venture to attract further de-risking funding from the multilateral banks to create a special purpose vehicle 6 months down the road. So that's project number 2 with the investment opportunities. Project numbers 3, 4, and 5 really start getting interesting from a holistic perspective. And this is where I want us to pause and think about the business case, the simple business case of supply and demand, right? In Trinidad, you may have remember that I mentioned about 20,000 tons per year of the NewGen project generating low carbon and green hydrogen. That's roughly all in about a $400 million investment. What many people don't realize is Trinidad and Tobago suffers a deficit of 400,000 tons per year of hydrogen today. Now, if you do the math, one project, 20,000 tons per year, 400 million US, you're looking at least another 15 of those type projects potential in Trinidad and Tobago. So one aha moment I want to leave you with is Trinidad and Tobago in itself, I would arguably say, is the single largest destination to attract renewable energy generation or importation, because the gigawatts required will take a tremendous amount of effort for that country in itself to create. So that's the demand side. On the supply side, if you look at countries like Dominica, St. Kitts, Nevis, any geothermal-rich country, or any renewable energy surplus country, even Guyana counts, where even if you were to convert the entire population to be green in a green hydrogen economy, there will be ample left for green energy export or green hydrogen export. And then you now look at the ecosystem of the Caribbean and you realize, well, wait a minute, if I've got a supply on one side, excess supply, and an immediate demand with an existing infrastructure of sunk costs in Point Lisas, what of that possibility of integrating the whole thing? What of that possibility of bringing that green energy from those islands, harnessing them, monetizing them, making the bankable projects real for these large-scale geothermal hydro dams, having that channeled through Trinidad, converted to green hydrogen downstream commodities, green ammonia, green methanol, that the EU and other entities are clamoring for to help with the carbon reduction footprint of the planet, realizing this green future for the entire Caribbean and looking at the Caribbean as a global green hydrogen hub export center for the planet. That's another aha moment that did not exist until the climate change forced green hydrogen onto the horizon of necessity. And that's what we at Kenneth State Green are in service of. You know, that's what gets us out of bed. And that's what I think is an investment worth making to help realize a bold new Caribbean and a sustainable energy future for us all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Philippe. Well said. And we're going to turn to you, Dwight, because you've been in the hydrogen space for a bit now. And we want to hear from you around the strategies and instruments that we will help make renewable startups investment ready. And are they cost effective? And if you can share with those in the audience and myself in terms of leveling that playing field in the region. We see some Caribbean islands a little further than others, but we have one common goal. How would you be able to shed some light there for startups and then around those who are already in the space to accelerate those projects that they are working on? Do share.
Yes, thank you, Jackie. Good morning, everybody. So, I mean, for me, a lot of my background started from the utility space, right? And I was working in utility in Jamaica for probably over 2 decades, right? And a lot of the interest in terms of development of projects came from large developers, right? And also small interest groups, small companies. I think the framework that you have set, the environmental framework that you have set to support those kind of investments is important. A lot of the issues in the Caribbean surround the regulatory environment and making sure that it is set in a way that facilitates the type of investment which is required. So like, for instance, with HDF Energy, which I'm now a part of, we are breaking ground in terms of hydrogen development in the Caribbean, right? Mm-hmm. It's a new technology, and a lot of things aren't known about it in terms of how to treat with that kind of investment and development, right? Philip spoke about our initiative in New Gen in Trinidad, but we didn't start there. We started in Martinique, right, where we installed a 1 megawatt fuel cell, and for that, fuel cells of that size are not well known in terms of utilization, and that was a test bed for us in Martinique. We moved on to French Guiana, where we have a project of the size of 50 megawatts, solar powered, delivering firm renewable capacity to the grid. And I mean, in the Caribbean, that is the fundamental issue that we have, that we want to go to high penetration levels, but the difficulty is that the instability of the most popular renewable sources, with solar and wind, creates a challenge, and we need more sources of firm renewable. And so companies will be able to move in that direction, but they have to be assured, right, so that the investments are safe, secure, and the risk is managed effectively. And I think in Jamaica, for instance, we have had a long history of investments, right, from the 90s to now, private investment in energy, right, under power purchase agreements. But for instance, when you look at the other Caribbean countries, there are not a lot of examples of private investments being facilitated, and so the framework is not as developed as it would, for instance, be in Jamaica, right? Some of them don't have strong regulatory environments, some have no regulators at all, right? And those things would inspire confidence to the investors to come into that environment. And so, for instance, we are in Barbados now, right? Trying to install a similar project that we did we're doing in French Guiana. So the French Guiana project is under construction, and the development time for these projects is 4 to 5 years, right? We just got news today, right, that our project in Barbados has been given the green light for funding from the Green Climate Fund, and that's a significant achievement for us. So, you know, that is a step in the right direction for us, and we're looking forward to bigger and better things. We're looking at the Northern Caribbean to do a lot more investments, similar type, but larger scale, for instance, in Jamaica. And so, I mean, it depends on how much funding is given to the early development stages, because that is where the greatest risk is. When you don't know if you have a project that is viable, when you're trying to do the development and design work to submit for the type of approvals that are required to get the larger financing. And so I think those are the things which need to be put in place to facilitate the type of companies that can come forward and invest.
Thank you, Dwight. Certainly insightful. And Mervyn, I'm going to turn to you because you've been lending since 1993. So you have money to give away, as we understood it here earlier yesterday, that there's money to be had. And share with us if there's opportunity for this regional collaboration. We've heard the previous panel spoke about collaborating in ensuring that we achieve that common goal. So do you see collaboration and joint projects, pooling of resources, sharing of costs to attract large-scale investment for renewable energy in the Caribbean? And if so, how can we go about tapping into that investment?
Oh, thank you, Jackie, and good afternoon, everybody. I don't think I could claim lending since 1993, but I've been working with the U.S. Agency for International Development, which is the largest development agency in the world, since 1993. And you know, you speak about collaboration, and I think it's in a region like the Caribbean, it's absolutely essential. If you want to look at some of the issues, we could talk a little bit about some of the main constraints that might be affecting renewable energy uptake and the transition to green economy and so on. You would see that there are opportunities to collaborate around things like policy. There's opportunities to collaborate around learning and exchanges. There's opportunities to collaborate on financing and, you know, things like that. So collaboration is indispensable, and I see a forum like this as an opportunity for collaboration. Now, in terms of USAID, I am responsible for a unit that covers 11 countries, from the Bahamas, the OECS countries, Barbados, Trinidad, Tobago, Suriname, and Guyana. We have teamed up with sister units in Jamaica and the Dominican Republic to lend our support to nudging, if you will, the region further along in terms of the transition. Now, the title or the subtitle of the panel is Greening the Caribbean, one investment at a time. Well, what does one investment at a time mean? What does that mean in terms of the size, the type, the complexity of the investment? Well, from our perspective, we see that there are essentially 4 major constraints to moving things along. Dwight mentioned the regulatory environment. I just got somebody called my attention to something the CDB just put out, a technical note, minimum standards for the electricity, minimum regulatory standards for the electricity sector. So for us, we begin with the enabling environment. So what are the standards and regulations governing, you know, or incentivizing the energy transition? You know, we have to take into account things like, you know, the frameworks for independent power producers, things like taxes, subsidies, and feed-in tariffs and things like that all play a role in terms of setting the stage to encourage investment and to promote the green transition. Now, we can't ignore that the infrastructure may not really be there yet for that. In terms of things like, for instance, the stability of the grid. How do you ensure climate resilient two-way transmission when you have variable sources like, wind and solar that could be fed in? Well, things like battery storage might be part of the answer, and things like that need to be worked on. But if you think about small islands, we talked about St. Kitts and Nevis, how you take that off-take capacity for those. So there's some serious issues. We also have to look at the security of the utilities, and cybersecurity is a growing issue that needs to be addressed. Now, when it comes down to one investment at a time, we're talking about bankable projects. And from USAID's perspective, what we're looking at is the small and medium size and, those MSMEs, if you will. But we also realize that the constraints also affect larger investments as well. But when we look at bankable projects, we see that there are issues with respect to the ability, the capabilities of these smaller firms or new firms to really respond to appropriately. We also think there's weaknesses in things like due diligence. And of course, for investors, the cost of capital is somewhat high, if you will, and that affects their return on investment. So what do you do about finance in this space? And we think that, the important thing is to recognize that some of the investment products or the financing products don't meet the MSMEs where they are. So this is an area that needs to be addressed. And one of the things that we are trying to do is to work directly to do things like prepare enterprises for investment. So things like pre-feasibility studies are part of our toolkit. And so we also realize that there is financing out there, but the space, it might be a crowded landscape and a confusing landscape for the unsophisticated or, the firms that are not really, aware on how to navigate that kind of space. So in this regard, we are doing as much as we can to find ways to collaborate in a crowded, in a donor landscape and an environment where the incentives are clearly there to move together to try to find solutions. I want to call attention, before I stop, I want to call attention to some of the work that we are doing. We are working with utilities, for example, to address cybersecurity issues. We're also working to do things like in Jamaica and the Dominican Republic, we're doing solar rooftop assessments. We're helping banks in the Dominican Republic understand the market better so they could make lending possible. But one of the activities that is newly launched is the Caribbean Climate Investment Program. I want to call your attention to this because they have a booth here. Please go by and see them. Where they are right now is they are in the midst of providing $6 million in grant funding to help support those SMMEs that may not be, let's say, that are a bank, they have the fundamentals, but they need the support to get to the next level. But this will also serve as the starting point for project preparation facilities that will work with even those organizations that are not so, don't have the fundamentals yet, but they have the potential. So we will help strengthen technical operations and their bankability down the road. I just want to say that in terms of where we see the Caribbean going is firmly in the space of working together and finding ways to learn from each other. Again, stressing collaboration and taking advantage of the assets we can bring to the table. I'll stop
Excellent, excellent, and excellent segue now for Felipe to tell us how he was successful, how the EU was so successful in pulling various policymakers, countries together to make it happen, and what framework would you recommend for the Caribbean region who is now trying to achieve similar goals? Over to you, Felipe.
Thank you, Jackie. Good afternoon, everybody. I think the Deputy Prime Minister referred to this morning to the European single market, and indeed as maybe a blueprint for some of the issues that the Caribbean could be facing. In the case of the energy transition, it certainly is one where we can maybe find some lessons learned. And the context in which the EU is focusing on investments in the region is in this global gateway strategy that was mentioned already before, in terms of attracting investments and private sector investments in particular to this region, and renewable energy is one of the of course key sectors. We want to do this in three ways. One, indeed we can find lessons learned from the EU model that could be applicable. Two, on assistance to policy and regulatory frameworks. And third, of course, assistance and support and financial support to develop bankable projects. So when you think about the energy transition in Europe, we're talking about 27 member states, different regulators, different energy mixes, different models. But we have met the 2020 objectives by a long shot, and we are well in line to meeting our 2030 objectives as well. And this with a huge shock, which is of course, Russia war, which has absolutely changed the dynamic of the European energy landscape. So how has this been possible? And I think one of the keys here is it's only been possible to do it as a bloc. And by having, technology is of course an enabler, but public policy has been key in this regard. By having 27 different regulators, 27 countries working on a cohesive, coherent energy policy across different sectors, and we're talking energy, transport, research, of course, industry, this has been able to, it's not about just setting targets and having objectives. It's about setting then grounding these in directives and regulations and in enforcement, right? You need to be able to set those goals for industry to understand what the rules of the game are and to adapt. This is good for policymakers, but particularly for industry. When you have 10, 20, 30-year targets that you actually enforce, it's something that gives the private sector the ability to adapt, to invest, and to organize themselves. Another lesson, I think, from the European model is that whereas the overall targets are clear, it was down to the member states and their individual realities to adapt to these targets. So there was sustainability in this flexibility, and the countries were able to, of course, take out their own policy measures to reach this common goal. A key here has been, of course, the pooling of the EU funds, the pooling of the EU budget to be able to invest in these strategies, among other things, for the interconnection of the network, which is very challenging, of course, in the Caribbean. So maybe there's less to be learned there. But at the same time, I think when we talk about the potential of geothermal in Dominica, for such a small market, and we heard before about the potential of geothermal in Nevis to be able to export, you need this type of grid connectivity. So the lesson here is as well that if you're looking at regulation, harmonization of policy at a regional level, there's an added value in doing it in a coordinated manner, even if the countries are at different stages, because ultimately you're going to have to rely on each other's networks. Another important thing here is that we've made a lot of mistakes. So we've gotten things right, but we've made mistakes. So of course the European model is maybe proper for Europe, but there's a lot of lessons to be learned there that we can certainly apply, help out, and learn from. Already we've been working for quite a while on the regulatory and the policy side in the Caribbean, and I won't go into many of the details, but we've worked a lot with CCRE. We've funded project preparation facilities with CCRE. We've worked on national legislation and studies and feasibility studies in almost all the countries in the Caribbean. But maybe one thing that I'd like to highlight is that in the preparation of this global gateway investment agenda, we've had a lot of discussions with investors. And what we're hearing from investors, European investors, and what they want from us as European Union to help them with, is not necessarily on the financing as much as precisely on working with governments on, first of all, this regulatory framework, ensuring this transparency, for example, on the PPAs and the way that these are maybe limiting some of the entries of bigger players because of their maybe not being open to external investors or just simply the structure they have. The long-term certainty of these frameworks. Of course, even support to the government's investment pipelines. We're being asked also to, in some cases, embed officials in certain administrations to help them develop these project pipelines and to build capacity in both governments and regulators. And we're very happy to be able to do this as well. Then, of course, more innovative financing approaches. We heard before from a colleague at the European Investment Bank and others on how we can help with this. But maybe to summarize the type of support that we are providing the region and that we want to continue to provide the region. On regulatory and policy work, we have a flagship program called Euroclima, and this is certainly the go-to for the governments to sit down with us and different partners that we're financing to see how we can contribute to precisely at country and regional level, try to develop these norms and these rules that can help the energy market thrive. We can provide more technical support, and here we're talking about either better information in terms of feasibility studies, but also project preparation facilities. We have several project preparation facilities available for both public and private investors across the board. Innovative financing, we're doing quite a bit of this together with international partners or the EIB, for example, on blending, where we take our grant money and we blend it with a private loan to make that operation more bankable. Or right now we're deploying financial guarantees, and we're going to be deploying together with several European development finance institutions a wide range of innovative financing guarantees for including renewable energy programs across the Latin American and Caribbean regions. And hopefully we'll be able to sign those early next year, and we can then provide with a bit more information, but this is certainly helpful for the private sector because the idea here is to de-risk the private sector. And then lastly, also, we're supporting SMEs in their green transition, and this is thankfully part of the work that we're doing with the Caribbean Export Development Agency. So maybe just to close, I'd say that the Caribbean, we see a huge potential. We carried out a study actually on this potential earlier this year that we have published already on renewable energy in the Caribbean by country with potential, with costing, and with the regulatory barriers that maybe are still hampering some of this development, but also in the context of the economic partnership with the EU and the potential for EU firms to come into the region and invest. It's public, but we're going to be putting it on hopefully the Caribbean Export Development Agency website as well, so it's accessible to all. And maybe one final message would be that the potential is there. The financing is clearly there. The investors are waiting. It really is, in large part, down to the policymakers to get this right, to get the incentives right, to get the regulation right, to make sure that this is coordinated, to make sure that the smaller investors get that financing, maybe as Dwight was saying, at those initial stages of pre-feasibility, feasibility. And as development partners, as Mervyn was saying, that we coordinate between each other to make sure that we can support this potential.
Excellent. Thank you, Felipe. Ladies and gentlemen, you have heard the sense of urgency that this panelist has. Like I said at the beginning, it's a passionate group of gentlemen who are well-versed in the area of renewables, but I want to engage you in the conversation. I think I have time for maybe just 2 questions. So if there's anyone in the audience who have a question for us, please come forward and ask your questions. I don't want to be the only one asking these questions. I can sit at their feet all day and listen, but I want to engage you as well. Is there any questions in the audience? Go right ahead.
Thank you for the opportunity. I want to go back to Philip. You were talking 40 years ago, I worked for British Gas, and the biggest achievement we made in British Gas was to have a national grid system the whole length and breadth of the British Isles. It was a wonderful thing and supported every area of the British Isles. Is that what you're talking about with a national grid system for the Caribbean? Firstly, answer that part first, please.
Yes, and the difference is this one would be green. It would be the interconnectivity of green electrons or green electricity within the Caribbean, where there would be an ebb and flow between those Caribbean islands that may have surplus or demand that would then allow the entire Caribbean region to be looked at as one green energy hub, which would have the economies of scale to make it a competitively exportable entity. So,
okay,
yes.
well, that part is excellent. I fully endorse that. I was not there at the beginning of the British gas experiment in 1948, but not long after. But also, is there a way of, for instance, with Guyana, we don't want Guyana to make the same mistakes of selling the gas off cheap and not making any returns as much as they could. Within that grid system, are there areas of expertise that are going to be placed on different parts of the different islands to maximize the benefit of that energy in downstream work? Can that be in the EU, or anybody can assist with that then?
Just so I understand the question for the panel, the question is if there are areas of expertise within the Caribbean that can specialize in realizing that overall vision?
The energy those different islands will be supplied with, can different islands benefit downstream industries to maximize the benefit of receiving that energy?
Off the top of my head, yes, because each island will have a different configuration that will lend itself more or less to whether it's a green hydrogen complex, green ammonia, green methanol, green ports. Do they have naturally occurring deep water ports? The beauty of this overall consideration is it allows each island to leverage its strengths into the area of expertise that it may be able to specialize in to bring a competitive advantage. I don't know if there's anything that the panel wants to add to that.
No.
Okay.
Thank
Okay,
you.
well, I'd love that to happen. I think that would be an excellent opportunity for the EU or any of these other funders, because I think that's where we've gone wrong in the past, is we haven't maximized the benefits of those energy resources and things. So thank you.
Thank you very much for your question.
Good evening, everyone. Good afternoon, sorry. I just wanted to say I'm excited about what I've heard at CIF during your time in the Bahamas. I'd like to ask Phil a question. We represent several multinational firms that have proprietary technology and funding, and we want to collaborate with you to bring this green energy revolution to the Caribbean. In fact, we're traveling to Grand Bahama, I think on Thursday, and we were looking to establish a green energy hub in Grand Bahama, Andros, or maybe Maguana. So I would like to meet with you. As far as the European Union is concerned, so I'd like to ask you specifically, how are you producing your green hydrogen? That's the question to you. And then for the gentleman from the EU, we've been reading about the challenges of getting our export green hydrogen into the EU. I'd like you to address that for us, because we've got persons that are very interested in that opportunity for the Caribbean, not only to generate energy, water, and food security with the technology that we have, but also to produce substantial export markets for the region. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So I'll answer very quickly, and happy to meet with you afterwards. I would like to defer the floor to Felipe, but to answer your question, in Trinidad, the low-carbon green hydrogen would be generated from a combination of solar and excess heat coming off of our power plants. In Dominica, it would be from the generation of electricity from the geothermal supply that would then be, again, through the electrolysis of water, would create the green hydrogen, which could then be converted to green ammonia or green methanol, which is transportable to other parts of the world. Felipe?
Can you hear me? Yeah. So maybe to answer in two ways to your question, I think on the first part, exporting green energy to the EU, I think it's no secret the EU is in the market for green energy. So of course, I think at that point it would be a question of the cost of sending green energy from the Caribbean to the EU and whether that's a business model that works. I mean, I don't know the data, but I think we would be certainly glad to take it. But I think there's another angle there, precisely on the Trinidad side, and on the green, I think what was Philip was referring to before, on this carbon border adjustment mechanism. And in the case of carbon-intensive industries and the products that you can get through them, of course the EU is putting quite an eye out now for the carbon leakage issue and the fact that the products that are now going to be imported into the EU need to have lower carbon footprint. So the potential of energy exchanges, for example, to get greener energy into a country like Trinidad, as was mentioned before, is also because of the type of energy mix that would go into the production and manufacturing of certain products that then could be exported to the EU. Because the EU investors, that's something that we'll certainly be looking at, is to invest in industries that have a lower carbon footprint for manufacturing to then export to the EU. So that's maybe a second angle of your question, which I think would be quite relevant for certain countries in the Caribbean.
Thank you very much. The conversation has just begun. We just had limited time to whet your appetite. So feel free to connect with us on the app. We would like you to also rate our session on the poll, but connect with us on the app for further questions. And as we network, feel free to engage my panelists. I want to thank you for your time, your attention, and good afternoon, handing back over to Anastasia. Thank you all.
Thank you so much to Dr. Jackie Bendy and these phenomenal panelists on Greening the Caribbean. Please come forward for a photo. And as they do so, we have a word from our partners at Republic Bank.
Building something outstanding takes planning. It takes skill and vision. At Republic Bank, we understand this because we've put planning, skill, and vision into being the best that we can be for you. Because we're invested in you.
Republic Bank, we're the one for you.
Thank you to our partners at Republic Bank, and again, thank you for paying such attention to this panel. This is so critical for the future of the Caribbean as we are at this critical juncture, and so it was great to hear them speak. Again, we want you to rate that session. Please let us know what you enjoyed about it, what we can do to continue to improve the content you receive. You can do that by going to the app and reviewing that session now. And again, if you like prizes like me, here in the Bahamas we call it being tingsy. So if you like a little bit of things, nice prizes, you want to make sure that you're using the app because we are going to give a prize away to the person who is most engaged with it. The afternoon continues. I assure you that lunch is not far away. But before we get there, we do have an important conversation that we want to have with an outstanding gentleman. His name is Mr. Aaron, this is the first last name I think I may mess up. Mr. Aaron Bylandberry. Did I kind of get it? Kind of get it. Okay. Managing Director and partner of the Boston Consulting Group, and he's going to be sharing lessons from the front lines of the renewable energy revolution. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you very much. Excellent. I think we have some slides we'll put up. But first, thank you very much for hosting. I had a chance to speak at last year's event. Thank you, Diodon and others. It's a fantastic event, first because it's bringing so many leaders from the region who are thinking forward. It's also all about coordination, sharing, communication, coordination, which I think is a theme that's emerging very clearly, as well as thank you for setting the tone of less talk, more action. I'm a partner out of Washington, D.C. with Boston Consulting Group. We're a 30,000 plus employee management consulting firm. I've worked for 20 plus years across the energy and infrastructure sectors, supporting governments, major infrastructure investors, as well as utilities and developers. We spend a lot of time in the Caribbean. Our role generally, and my role here today, is really to provide the fact base for the business case, the fact base for solving some of the challenges that we see in the region to bring renewable energy. And I'm going to start by providing slides I'm a consultant, so that is what I'm going to do. But hopefully these provide a lot of facts that allow you and all of you to catalyze the capital that we're talking about into the region. The facts, the underlying business case, et cetera. Let's go to the next one. I'm going to try to make sure this works here. Great. It looks like we're good. Maybe not. There we go. Great. So I think one thing we heard, I don't have it on the screen here, so we can put that there. One thing we heard quite clearly is that what the energy transition is. It's really about moving away from fossil fuels to renewable energy. I think that's basic for everyone. But we like to tend to look at it with like three major pillars. One being we're going to have to phase down fossil fuels. Second, we're going to have to bring more capital financing into renewables to make that transition and support it. And the third, we're going to need to improve that clean energy offer. What does that mean? I think what we heard quite clearly is that there is no lack of capital. And in some cases, the phase down, the technical aspects of taking coal out of the system, even reducing gas and diesel, is something that we know very well. But the offer on the table, the business case, the solution, the package of the regulatory framework, as well as the commercial underlying business case, is in many cases what's missing here. And there's a particular set of reasons globally, and I'm going to speak to that first, but then there's a very particular set of reasons and challenges regionally that fortunately in fora like this and some of the other foreign initiatives that we heard from the European Union, we've heard from OECS, we've heard from Atlantic Council and others, really can come together to develop the framework for coordination. Because the key here, generally speaking, in my view, is that the financing, again, is not the challenge. That if we get the offer right, if we get the case right for renewables, the underlying resource planning, the underlying procurement and centralized procurement, then the deals will follow. And I think to challenge maybe the previous panel a little bit, what I think we're hoping to see and what I'm hearing day in, day out from investors in the U.S. looking to the region, from the major contractors, is that it actually isn't about one project at a time. It's about how do we bring large bundles of projects together in programmatic frameworks that allow capital to justify spending their time, EPCs to justify to spending their time, technology providers to spend their time, and to also procure at scale for lower costs. So we'll get to that. But I'm going to walk very quickly through some of the slides. First, I think many of you know the future actually is quite impressive in terms of our transition for renewables. Based on forecasting what's required, we are hopefully going to be shifting from a mix of energy sources of 80% fossil, 20% renewable, vice versa. I think the one point here, though, is we're not going to be relying on one type of renewable technology. It isn't going to be solar. It isn't just going to be wind. It's actually going to be a combination of various renewable sources depending on the resource at the site, depending on the grid requirements, et cetera. In order to get there, we're going to have to deploy capital at a scale that we really haven't seen before. That having been said, the capital is available. Most of the projections, this is IEA, is taking us from investing $2 trillion a year in the energy space to something closer to $5 on an annual basis. And so that's a lot of capital, but the pools are there, and also it's a tremendous opportunity. We're doing it because we have to. In many ways, we all know the climate challenge, but the climate challenge is particularly real for those of us that live and spend time and work and live in the Caribbean, in the sense that warming is quite real. There's a number of our communities that are highly vulnerable to rising seawater levels. There's a significant number of people, and these are global numbers, these are not regional, but the numbers are astounding in terms of the level of risk. And also, this is a significant drag on the global GDP, but particularly at the sovereign and kind of individual country level, the need without any kind of insurance regime to set aside funding to deal with rising seawaters, higher temperatures is massive, and kind of puts many economies into a cycle of negative GDP growth, potentially. Fortunately, there has been a call to action. We've seen that over the past 3 years at COP, and there's some very real commitments that have been made to drop down the coal as part of an energy mix, to drive up renewables, and this is a 30% of the energy mix, up from something closer to 10%, or actually probably less than that, more like 4 or 5%, to drive the percentage of clean mobility up significantly and to deploy capital at scale. It also, this transition, has been well documented to create a set of additional benefits aside from climate and beyond climate. This is about creating affordable energy solutions and access for people that, even if they may have access to power, as we see quite a bit in the region here, may be paying tremendous amounts per kilowatt hour. So we'll look at a graph later, but the average Caribbean power per kilowatt hour price is about 3 to 4 times it is in the southern United States. Significant jobs in everything from development, construction, operation. Whole economies are being built around the energy transition. Whole economies are being transitioned. And so there's a tremendous set of political as well as economic development benefits for the energy transition. The impact overall in terms of just growth obviously flows through the jobs, flows through the investment in technology, and the health impacts are quite obvious, particularly in point source solutions like some of the ports and other parts of the region and other parts of the U.S. we see where significant diesel generation can cause direct health impacts and negative health impacts. Overall, there's also a lot of thinking being done, and this is globally, this is at the MDBs, this is in the corporate world, on what it actually means and what it takes to transition in a just way. And this is about transitioning economies. A number of examples here, but the JET-P Fund, significant funding for South Africa to transition its coal, but also a number of funds and programs where not only was there a transition of the technology of the underlying generation base from coal to, in most cases, some mix of solar and storage, but there was a set of training initiatives, redevelopment initiatives that actually helped that economy transition, because there will continue to be significant resistance to the energy transition if stakeholders that are currently invested in the old fossil fuel economy are not brought along, are not given incentives, and not giving very direct solutions for transitioning their economy. Moving into the challenges. This all sounds great. There's benefits. We see them. We're obviously doing this for all the right reasons. So what makes it so hard? Generally speaking, energy is political. It's distributed in different ways across the world, and there's different sets of players with different sets of interests. So making sure that we have the coordination and we have the vision on the geopolitical front is important. There's been a lot of positive momentum. There's been a lot of focus on that coordination. That having been said, there's a lot of work to do. Growth for renewables is quite exciting, and we'll get into it, but the underlying base for that is that it's now more cost-effective than any other source of power generation. That having been said, we have significant limitations in the global supply chain that are hampering the ability to deploy the renewables that we want to at scale and at the price that makes it cost competitive. A big part of the challenge for the energy transition that was alluded to in a number of the panels is not just the cost, it's not just the business plan, it's not capital. It's the ability to physically integrate new forms of, in many cases, intermittent power into the grid. Every single grid in this region needs to be reset, rethought, reinvested in order to incorporate sufficient renewables to get it anywhere near a 50% target. This requires new investment in the grid itself. It requires new technology to manage the grid. It requires AI, and we'll speak to that. And it requires significant investments in storage. The major challenge for the U.S. market, which is seeing the largest renewable boom in its history, and in probably the largest that we'll ever see, is really interconnection. It takes a long time to identify where these renewable sources of power should be integrated. That can be, however, remedied by IRPs, resource plans, and we'll kind of attack that. The other major challenge we're seeing is just the supply chain. The supply chain, not just in challenges, but in the volatility. The ability to commit to pricing on everything from raw materials that goes through the EV chain, through steel, through cement, et cetera. And so there's a very important need, and many states and many countries are dealing with this head on, to create centralized procurement, to manage the flow, long-term contracts, to create less volatility in the supply chain, and then provide the incentives to invest in local manufacturing to near shore for that. And that's the basis for the bill and IRA boom in the US. Finally, energy trilemma, we'll speak to that. It's actually very challenging to make decisions about energy transition because you're balancing the environmental impact on one hand, the affordability impact on the other, and energy security. And that's a different calculus for every country, for every island, for every community. And so there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution for the renewable space. Just for a second on renewables, the growth is tremendous. It's incredibly exciting. However, there are a set of headwinds, and that really has to do a lot with trade. Most of the module manufacturing in the solar space, for example, is in China. Most of the battery manufacturing capabilities in China. There's a set of challenges both on importing, on tariffs, et cetera. That having been said, the cost for solar is, and this is old data at this point, is cost competitive with really any other source of power per kilowatt hour. Now, sometimes you have to embed the cost for interconnection. At the same time, the business case for transitioning to renewables is very strong. Again, each one of these solutions, though, has a very unique set of challenges that flows through the supply chain. In solar, obviously, it's modules, it's some of the copper. We hear a lot about battery and lithium, and the need to have regional and structured solutions for addressing the supply chain is more important than ever. And simply, we will not be able to make the transition in a cost-competitive way unless we do. I mentioned the energy trilemma. I think just to hit this home, in many cases, in kind of any kind of resource planning, leaders and decision makers need to decide what the right mix of generation is for their renewable transition that needs to check the box for all of these. You can't just have one. So it has to be environmentally better than where we are now. It has to provide you with a level of security from an energy geopolitical perspective, and of course, access and affordability. This is a really busy graph, but really important. As we go into planning for what the energy transition should look like for each country, for each island in the Caribbean, we need to have and go in with a very clear sense of what the pros and cons are for each technology. We are going to end up with a mix. There isn't going to be one technology solution. There's a lot of vendors, a lot of developers, a lot of technology providers that are pushing, obviously, their one solution. That's fantastic. That having been said, it's going to be very important for an analytically based decision-making process to get to the right answer. Just as an example, on the top we have cost. Right after that we have how long it takes to build the project. The availability is a key factor. Solar, while it may be lowest cost and actually is quite quick to put up, is not available all the time. It's not available at night unless you have some kind of storage related to it. So this kind of matrix is something that decision makers all over the world have used in order to make decisions and plan the future and plan investment. I'm going to move pretty quickly through some of these, but I think the key point is that each technology also has a trade-off in terms of how much does it cost to invest versus how much decarbonization benefit does it get. And also there's a whole set of technologies, some of which are generation. We tend to talk about wind and solar as the core for the energy transition. In many cases, investment in technology, particularly at the utility level, to enable better dispatch of power is just as important as the actual generation that you have. And on top of that, there's a whole set of other investments related to the non-generation space, energy storage to support the grid, et cetera, that are going to be quite important to get to the targets that we've set for ourselves. Hydrogen, we heard a bit about that earlier. It's incredibly exciting. It's going to be a part of the mix for this region and for the world. And what's so exciting about it is that it is a form of energy that can be stored, that can be transported in a way that obviously gas is, but if generated using renewable power is green. Power generation, industrial use cases that are using other forms of gas or hydrogen right now, buildings, transport, this is going to be the reality. And so the beginning of building a hydrogen economy for the region is a very exciting thing we heard from Julian. I'll skip this for now because we can get quite technical, but I do want to say we heard a lot about AI earlier this morning. AI is going to be one of the most important things to drive efficiencies at utilities. Utilities are in a very difficult place right now. They're expected to bring green power to all their customers. At the same time, many of their customers are taking their business onto their own roof, so off-grid, depriving the utility of actual revenue. And then also we see a lot of theft. That having been said, they still need to raise rates in order to reinvest in the system. In many cases, the only way that utilities have to go is to make themselves more efficient. And in many cases, the only way to make themselves more efficient is by integrating technology and digitizing a whole set of processes throughout the system that allow them to be more efficient and deliver power at a lower cost. So this is not just about technology, this is about affordability and is an essential part of being able to bring utilities that have a fundamentally sustainable business case. In the end, and this is a graph here that just shows where we're probably going to end up in the U.S. in terms of our grid, with the key point being we're going to have a lot more wind and solar in the U.S. We're going to have nuclear, not so relevant here, and biomass is going to play a very significant role. So when we look to the region, we're going to see a slightly different mix, but the point is that some of the core elements of this energy mix are going to play out, including gas, including LNG, because for the near term, a whole set of LNG facilities are being built, a whole set of LNG generation plants are being built that have the ability to eventually use green hydrogen, but they're going to be an important part of the base load to allow for the energy mix to move forward and be more renewable. What does this mean for the Caribbean? Just a few things very quickly. This energy trilemma I referenced is very, very real here. It's very hard to make decisions that are both supporting your energy security and affordability, but it's imperative, and actually renewables has a very strong case. The cost of doing projects, particularly small projects in the Caribbean, is effectively off the charts. This is one of the most expensive places to deliver renewable power in the current structure. Many cases because we're very focused on small projects here and there. We're very focused on a relatively undeveloped regulatory framework that takes a long time for development costs. So we're at a place right now where hopefully we can only do better, but the cost for delivering is very, very significant. And the reality here for the Caribbean is we are going to see a mix. We are going to see a plan, a resource plan that doesn't depend just on solar, just on wind. It's going to be different for each country. At the same time, we are going to have to rely on a mix. And the only solution here, and I'll get to the punchline, is really that we do need to have more regional coordination, at least at the point of planning, procurement, sourcing, and bundling. And I'll speak a little bit more to that. We saw the high cost. I mentioned we are effectively in the region 3-4 times what the average kilowatt hour cost is for the U.S. And a significant part, a surprising for most people that don't look at the region, a surprising percentage of the fuel mix is currently diesel and is currently fossil fuels. That having been said, and just a quick mapping of what's going on, there's a lot of projects that are in the pipeline, and it's very exciting. Just kind of a basic analysis shows over $13 billion of projects that are in the pipeline. But if you'll notice, most of that is announced, planning, basically talk, not action. And so our big challenge now is how do we move some of these projects that have been announced, that have been planned, into procurement, into financing, into development, into construction in a way that ideally is coordinated to reduce the costs. Another list of projects, I think many of you have actually worked on these or are working on these now, and it's very exciting because if we had looked back 3-4 years ago, there would have been only a fraction of these announced. The projection under the current plan is that we are going to move significantly, so double the renewables penetration. But in order for this to happen, we really are going to have kind of a reset of the utility business model. This is all in the context of a very real challenge that in my work and many of us face is that doing business, construction, development is much more expensive in the region. There's a lot of reasons for that, and many of us know them well, but the facts speak for themselves. The performance index for just logistics generally is much worse than the US. The average cost, more or less, for a solar facility here compared to the US is 15% more. And the cost premium, even for basic fuels to support the baseload power, is much higher. And this is all in the context of construction, and that's what you see on the left-hand side here, being very expensive and hard to manage anyways. So until we can address that, then we will have some challenges in doing it. That having been said, many folks here in this room and other places have really focused on what can we do? What is the solution to actually do this at scale? And a few core ingredients. Planning is essential. Developing coordinated planning that is data-based, that is analytically supported, that actually develops a set of interconnected power solutions for the region is really going to be a key step, because capital simply will not come unless there's visibility as to what that integrated resource plan looks like, until they know that they'll actually be able to build a facility, they'll be able to put their power into the grid, and they'll be able to get paid for it. There's a tremendous need, country by country, but regionally, to focus on how are we going to get modules in, how are we going to get equipment in, how are we going to get that in at a scale and at a price that actually makes sense for the underlying business case. And that's where the centralized procurement makes sense, is what would it look like if, and there's been a lot of initiatives on this, that we had more of a centralized procurement that would support project developers in accessing the market for modules, accessing the market for steel, et cetera, at scale. And then finally, other key ingredients, which I've already touched on, is as part of this IRP, we really are going to need to have an interconnection model that's faster than it is now, and a significant amount of investment into the utilities with business models that are sustainable. And what that really means is that utilities are going to have to start charging for distributed power. We're going to have to see interconnection charges. We're going to have to see a number of different ways and integration of technology that allows utilities to actually make a profit and reinvest in the system to allow for renewables to come on board. So I'm at time. We're moving to lunch, but I think we may have time for questions, we may not, but defer to the group here. But thank you for the opportunity.
So because I messed up Erin's name, I really did want to give time for questions. Unfortunately, I also want to get you to lunch on time. So I beg your indulgence. Please go ahead and review Erin's phenomenal session on the app. And of course, his name is Erin Beilenberg. Got it right. And you can connect with him using the app as well. So we encourage you to ask any of those questions that you might have from his presentation as we do move to lunch after our next speaker. At this time, we do want to, again, encourage you to review Erin's session, but it is now my pleasure to introduce Sergio Bandinelli. He's the Business Director for Technologia Ventures, and he has a brief but special presentation for us. Let's welcome Sergio Bandinelli as he comes.
Wow, this is impressive. So thank you for inviting me to be here. I'm very grateful to our friends from Caribbean Export, to Deodat, and the whole team of Caribbean Export. I'm going to talk to you about the EU-LAC Digital Accelerator. Okay, I'm coordinating this project, and I think it's a very exciting project. I hope I can transmit some of this excitement to you. So before we go into the details of the projects, I want to address three main elements, three main ideas that are motivating this project. So let's see if this works. This one. Yes. The first idea is about innovation, because innovation is about survival, okay? We are talking about here a big disruption in the market, and this is the digital disruption. Digital technologies are changing the way in which we do businesses, in particular from any of the different verticals, okay? So from agriculture down to health, from education to transport and mobility. So this is it is affecting all kinds of verticals. So the issue here is that this transformation is not only about introducing digital technologies in the businesses, about doing our businesses better, more effective, improving our businesses with digital technologies. It's about a true transformation of the businesses, okay? So is that why we talk about digital transformation? This implies a profound change in the businesses, reshaping value changes and redefining the markets and the relationship with the customers. So the good news I have for you that's an investor forum is that digital transformation is not about technology. It is about innovation and it is about investments. And here are some examples of what I'm saying. First example, you probably think these examples are away from your daily businesses, but in reality, I mean, I think that you will find similarities with your everyday business. First example I want to talk to you about is Blockbuster. Blockbuster is a company that was born in 1984. Their business was very simple. Their business model was renting videos and this was a very successful company. It was sold for $8,400 million. And at some stage, they were approached by a small startup called Netflix, okay? And these guys from Netflix, they proposed this company, Blockbuster, to develop together the streaming possibilities, okay? The streaming technology. This proposal was not taken by Blockbuster, and you know the end, okay? This company does not longer exist. We have Netflix in all of our devices right now, and the Blockbuster shops closed, the last one in 2013. So, lesson learned number one, look around and here to the startups and the entrepreneurial ecosystem that is around you. Second example, Kodak. Kodak is a big company that had a leading position in the market with a share of more than 50% worldwide and 80% in the US. They invented the digital camera. In 1975, it was invented by an engineer of Kodak. But the photograph paper division in Kodak was so strong that they actually did not look at digital technology, at digital photograph as one alternative for Kodak. And you know what happened. The paradox is that Kodak created the technology that actually took them to bankruptcy. So, lesson learned number two is innovation is not only doing inventions in the company, but it's also capturing the value of those inventions. Okay? And Kodak actually didn't succeed in doing that. Third example is Atari. Okay? For those that have some age like me, it's a company that developed the first video game consoles. Okay? And they were very successful. We all had some, when we were kids, we all had some console for video gaming with Atari. It was very successful because it sold a lot of consoles. For example, the Atari 2600 sold 42 million units. But they were a closed company in the sense that the video games were developed by themselves. They didn't open the video games to developers outside the company. What happened? That other companies like Nintendo and Sega got better video games, and they got more possibilities of introducing contents in their consoles, and Atari doesn't exist anymore. So, lesson learned number three is that digital transformation, digital economy is about openness, is about ecosystems, is about interacting in an ecosystem, in a platform with other agents. Okay, so this is an economy of ecosystems. Digital disruption also gives rise to other businesses, to new businesses that may come from sectors or from areas that are not your normal competitors. This is the case of Uber, for example. There it is. Of Uber, that it is not an evolution of a radio taxi company, and the case of Airbnb, which is not an evolution of a hotel chain, is not Marriott or I don't know, any other hotel chain that created Airbnb. So watch out, the competition may come from unexpected places. The second key concept I want to address is that innovation is about business. Okay, as we said, there are many different conversations about what is innovation, what is not innovation. The definition I like is that innovation is when the cashier rings. Okay, so when we close the process of innovation and we are able to capture the value of innovation. And this is, for example, what didn't happen with Kodak. So in a company, that wants to be a leader in innovation, how does this company look like? Okay, so a company has to be ambidextrous. I mean, it has to be excellent at executing the current business, but at the same time, they have to to devote some resources to search into new businesses or new opportunities, okay? And to improve the business and to renew the business. These two hands are very important and takes me to the third concept, okay? So when we look at the new businesses that a company should be looking at the innovation part of the company, is when we need to address the a portfolio of innovation projects that are, to some extent, characterized by uncertainty, because we don't know what these innovation projects will be successful or not. They are characterized by incomplete information, because we do not have the 100% certainty about whether it will be successful or not. And there are also changing conditions. So this looks very much, managing this portfolio of innovation projects looks very much as an investment activity. You have some limited resources and you need to maximize the value that is coming out from that innovation portfolio. So how to address this innovation portfolio in an effective way? Well, open innovation is a way of addressing this by sharing these risks and therefore de-risking the whole process of innovation. Open innovation is then risk reduction through collaboration by experimental approach. I mean, by trying to fail fast and cheap, and by sharing this risk with your collaborators, with your partners. In particular, what kind of partners we are looking at? We are looking at, in particular, collaborations between corporates and startups. Corporates and startups have very complementary objectives, and they are kind of missing what the others have, okay? So it looks as a very interesting way of partnership, okay? However, this is not that easy. Companies are doing this, collaborations between startups and corporates. These are some examples of companies that have deployed mechanisms to work with startups in different ways, okay? The type of mechanisms, they range from corporate venture capital. This is probably something that is very well known to you. I mean, by investing and taking some part of the ownership of a startup. That is one way of working within a startup. But there are also other mechanisms such as corporate accelerators, challenge competitions, scouting missions, and so on. In particular, I want to address one important way of collaborating with startups, which is called venture client. Okay? In venture client, the startup brings an innovative solution to solve a problem or a challenge that the company has. And this type of partnership, eventually, if it is successful, of course, it establishes a supplier relationship, and the company, the corporate, becomes a client of the startup, okay? So now I can get to the EU-LAC Digital Accelerator, because this EU-LAC Digital Accelerator is an effective way for digital open innovation, okay? So here we are proposing to have a very effective tool for creating these connections between corporates and startups and collaborating across regions, okay? So what we are looking here is at developing partnerships and strengthening partnerships between the region, between the European Union, companies in the European Union and companies in Latin America and in the Caribbean to develop these open innovation partnerships, and in particular by collaborating between startups and corporations. We are looking at this kind of, we are doing basically two activities. On one side, generating these partnerships, okay? The partnership is generated by matching the needs and the challenges from corporations with the capabilities of startups. So this is the first part of the game. Once we have these matchings, when we have these collaborations, the second part is to grow the partnership. And this is done through acceleration services that take this partnership to a following step, okay? The important thing here is that all regions benefit from the partnership in the same way, okay? So it's a win-win engagement between corporates. Corporates can be from Europe and startups, for example, from the Caribbean region, or it can be corporates from the Caribbean region and startups from Europe. So it's a very specular way of working, okay? It can also be done between corporates from the Caribbean region and startups from Latin America, or corporates from Latin America and startups from the Caribbean region. So what we are looking at is at interregional partnership. This project is a project that is supported by the European Union, it's financed by the European Commission, and it's a project that is it's a part of the DG International Partnership, and is a part of the Global Gateway Initiative. Okay. So, what corporates get in this project? How we do it? From the corporate point of view, what we ask the corporate is to identify the challenges. So we start from the demand side and look at the challenges, look at the problems that corporates have in addressing the digital transformation issues, in addressing the digital disruption. We help corporates to find the partners to improve or to develop new businesses using digital capabilities, and establish a venture client collaboration with the startups that eventually fit the problem that the corporate has, okay? At the same time, the corporates get exposure to digital transformation initiatives in other parts of the world. What the startups get, okay? On the other side, startups are looking to connect with venture clients, okay? They get potential clients, and they get the support to develop this partnership with their customers or the corporates that they're addressing the challenges, okay? They get visibility through this international prestigious network, and they get also the exposure to challenging problems and opportunities. So the objective here is that after matching, we have the acceleration support, okay? So the acceleration support is for partnerships, okay? So once we have these partnerships between corporates and startups, these partnerships, they can submit their proposals to acceleration calls that we have. The first acceleration call is opening at the beginning of next year, at the beginning of 2024, and we will have several openings, several calls across the duration of the project, which is a duration of 5 years, okay? So we have every 6 months new calls of partnerships that can get these support services, these acceleration services. The selected partnerships will receive these acceleration services from qualified professionals, and the services are valued up to 40K euros, okay? In the case of partnerships where there is a Caribbean partner, let's say the price or the value of the support services can get up to 40K euros. And the kind of support that you get includes these 4 elements. First of all, a roadmap, okay? So what we do here is to work together with the partnership to understand what are the next steps, the plan that they want to proceed to develop this partnership, okay? So we do it in a customized way, partnership by partnership. By understanding this plan, this roadmap, we understand also and we agree with the partnership what are the other services that the other acceleration services that they need to perform to strengthen their partnership, okay? And the kind of acceleration services we are proposing are of three additional kinds. First of all, proof of concept services to analyze that the problem or that the solution that the startup is proposing actually fits with the problem or the challenges that the corporation is bringing to the table, okay? This can involve the performing pilots, showcases, prototypes, validation exercises, whatever. I mean, it can take different form. But the objective here is to make sure that the solution fits the problem. The second kind of services regards business case development. So this has to do with understanding and making sure that we actually have a business case for the partnership in terms of the market that is being addressed, in terms of the offering having a competitive advantage, in terms of profitability, and so on. And finally, the last part of the services, of the acceleration services, are addressing the exposure to investors or to financial institutions that may provide the resources so that this partnership can continue growing, okay? And here we have a full set of networks towards investors and towards financial institutions at local and regional and international level. In a nutshell, what we have, as I said, 2 main activities: matching and building and acceleration of the partnerships, okay? The matching is the corporates from one side that bring their challenges, and the startups on the other side that in some way match their capabilities with the challenges, okay? We have a full platform to develop these matchings, and of course, we are not only talking about a platform where we just give names, but we are talking about creating trust between corporates and startups that are crossing the Atlantic or are crossing the Caribbean Sea, let's say. And in some way, this what we need to do is to make sure that we introduce the corresponding partner, creating this environment of trust to develop businesses and to develop these partnerships. Once these partnerships are, let's say, materialized in some kind of MOU or letter of intent or a contract, then these partnerships can present themselves to these open calls for partnerships and receive, if selected, receive the support of the acceleration services that we were talking about. So the question is, how do I get started, okay? Oh, it's important to say that in the implementation team, we do not only have Tecnalia as a coordinator of the project, but also a very renowned business school, which is IESE, the corporate venture of Telefónica. You know, it's a very digital company from Spain, but is also deploying their businesses not only in Europe, but also in the whole Latin America. We have networks, the European Business Network and the European Business Angel Network that gives us, that helps us reaching the accelerators and the investors. We have, of course, a Caribbean Export as our partner here in the Caribbean to develop these activities, and we are putting a specific focus in the Caribbean. And we have also corporation agencies like Expertise France and developing banks such as BID Labs, okay, IDB Labs. Okay, so this is the team that is working in this project, and hopefully talking to you and being able to develop these partnerships together. So the question is how to get started. Well, it's important to say that we do not only address corporations and startups, we also address investors, accelerators, business associations, and public bodies that eventually bring different perspectives also to the project. And we address startups that are bringing capabilities in all possible digital technologies, so including cybersecurity, big data, robotics, satellites, IoT, artificial intelligence. I mean, a broad digital technologies in a broad sense. So the game starts by defining these corporate challenges, okay? And the good news is that right after the launch, which is waiting for us all, we have a workshop where we will start not only talking business, but doing business, okay? And this doing business refers to defining these corporate challenges. So I invite all of you to come to this workshop that is held, as I said, at 3 p.m. in Adonis Room, which is just around the corner here, and to connect with the EU-LAC Digital Accelerator website. The link is there, eulacdigitalaccelerator.com. There you can either enter the platform and start providing your challenges, and if you don't know how to do that, come to the workshop this afternoon. And at least what you can do is to provide your data, so to keep in touch with the developments of the project, get our newsletter, and so on. So this is it, what I wanted to talk about you today, and hopefully this is of interest for you, and we will be using this project to create partnerships across the Atlantic and across the Caribbean with Latin America and with Europe from the Caribbean partners. Thank you very much.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, one more round of applause for Sergio Bandinelli and EU-LAC. Very exciting about what can happen there, and I know that there are businesses in the room who will take advantage of that. Woo! We've done it. We've come to the end of the morning. Everyone gives yourself a round of applause. And again, to all of our panelists, our moderators, it has been a pleasure. The fun does not stop now. As a matter of fact, some may say it's just getting started. Of course, we want to invite you to lunch, but we do, of course, want to remind you to also download the app. If you've not yet done so, please go ahead, complete the polling sessions for those sessions where we did have polls. Sergio has done the kindness of inviting you to learn more about this. Only gonna let 50 people in, so it's gonna be the first 50 to Sergio, but they will show you how you can get started right away in business. And of course, that's gonna be taking place, originally we planned for 3 o'clock. It's now been moved to 3:30, just to make sure that you have sufficient time for lunch. But if you would like to see Sergio and learn more about Technalia, they will be in the Adonis Room 3 and 4. That's the Adonis Room 3 and 4 if you'd like to learn more about Technalia. I'm particularly excited because I'm going to a session called Ag Tech and Renewable Energy. It's one of the investment villages. We're going to be hearing from some Caribbean businesses in that space. Investors will be giving them feedback on how they can make those presentations even better, and hopefully we will see some deals exchanged as well. So if you want to join me there, that's going to be in the Imperial E, again starting at 3:30 p.m. The ICT and Logistics and Transport Investment Village is also going to take place this afternoon. That's going to be in HERA, H-E-R-A, rooms 1 and 2. Now that one starts at 4:20 p.m. and goes until 6 p.m. And then, of course, if you've been using your app to make connections and to meet with people, perhaps some of our panelists as well, you are going to continue to have those meetings available to you in our B2B suites. That's EROS, E-R-O-S, 1, 2, and 3, and those start at 3:30 as well and go until 6 p.m. That's a lot of information, but I think that you got it. If you have the app, it is going to help you to be able to find what I just said, so make sure that you're utilizing that app. Later on tonight, those who've received the invitation for it, we have the Elite Connect. That's happening at Royal Overlook from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. And simultaneously, there is the Draper Pitch Competition. So there's a pitch competition happening this evening. If you would like to attend that, that happens in Imperial E, and that's from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. as well. Quite a bit of information, but you all are the best and the brightest in business and industry, so I'm sure you've absorbed it. If you need to reference something, again, you want to go to the app, all of this information is there. And now, I want to thank you for your patience this morning. I want to encourage you to be here and on time tomorrow. We have a 9 a.m. start, and we want to fill the room. My boss, Deodat, has come over and just reminded me that we want to encourage more of you to sit up toward the front as possible. So as you come into the room tomorrow, please feel free. I do not bite. Most days. I do not bite. I want you all to come on up closely to make sure that we can give our best attention to our presenters and panelists. And with that being said, please enjoy your lunch, continue to enjoy the conference, and we will be back at one of the rooms mentioned later this afternoon starting at 3:30. Thank you.